The Lord of Mages, I ruined the tech tree. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 226 Honors and Conferment. The next morning. The morning light dispelled the morning mist, and the soft warm wind blew over the green plants planted on both sides of the road. However, they were not ordinary green plants. They were fluorescent grass from the abandoned land. As the footsteps of the Antorians set foot on the land on the other side of the mountains, more and more fluorescent grass was discovered and picked. So, at least in the Thorn territory, in this city regarded as the political center of Antoria, fluorescent grass is no longer a scarce thing. During the time when Leon led his army to the expedition, Aaron issued a series of administrative orders very skillfully, so that the Thorn territory also had the characteristics of a brightly lit city. Public favorability +10, city attraction +10, every night, the fruit of the fluorescent grass, that is, the fluorescent fruit, will secrete some juice and try to poke its head out from under the wrapping of the surrounding leaves. Although this process is often not too smooth, after repeated attempts and sprints, the leaves wrapped around the fruit will eventually surrender under the lubrication of the juice, allowing the translucent fluorescent fruit to stand upright and release a slightly hazy light yellow light under the dark night. And every time the first morning light blooms in the sky, the leaves that were originally scattered around will wrap the fruit again. Only a tight and narrow gap is left to collect the light reflected from the sky. Day after day, year after year. Let the Thorn territory achieve a goal that even the stupid earthlings cannot achieve, an entire city, completely, 100% using clean energy, providing lighting under the night. Although the sky has just brightened, the crowds on the road are already bustling, and the streets are filled with a unique and pleasant aroma of bread just out of the oven. Since Leon became the ruler of this land, he has strived to create more jobs and provide employment opportunities for every citizen. On the one hand, it helps to maintain social stability in Antolia, and on the other hand, it can also ensure the lives of the people in the territory. It is also under the guidance of this idea that various industries in the Thorn territory, specifically the industries controlled by the Ximena family, have already carried out a series of expansions and constructions under Leon's orders. Especially the weaving workshop of Moonlight Velvet. The number of textile workers originally employed alone has skyrocketed from more than 100 at the beginning to more than 300 today. If we add the laborers responsible for cutting down moon mushroom trees, transporting raw materials and providing various logistical support services, the Moonlight Velvet alone provides jobs for thousands of people. In addition, the same is true for a series of industries such as the Gloom Slime Factory and the Magic Potion Production Workshop. Especially the Gloom Slime Factory. As the cement industry of the Antolia version, Antolia is now in need of it everywhere. It is needed for building roads and bridges, and for building new cities. Not to mention the development of abandoned lands. It is precisely because of the above that the cement industry in Antolia can definitely be regarded as an untapped blue ocean. What's more, in order to build a road connecting the southwest highlands to the south bank of the Myrson River, Leon even ordered the construction of the first branch of the Gloom Slime Factory in Port Eider, referred to as the first branch. And since everyone is not as tight as before, Antolia's business will naturally develop. Although it is still in its infancy, it has at least taken shape as a thriving development. At least for ordinary people, buying a loaf of bread is not a problem. But today is undoubtedly a special day. Because in the square in front of the castle of Thorn territory, Antolia Marcus León Ximena will officially hold the first awarding ceremony since he took over the rule. This is actually reasonable. The war is over, and the Ximena family's income is in hand. So what about others? Putting aside other things, generals like Stein, Juan, and Andrew who have made great contributions to the Ximena family can't just be dismissed with a good job, right? As for the subjects, they don't actually know what the awarding ceremony is. But what they know is that the lord they love will appear at the awarding ceremony. The sky is cloudless and the weather is clear. The Antolian mercenaries are wearing bright Andal standard armor, which was snatched from the Duke of Galicia. They are arranged in a strict queue in the square in front of the castle. Looking from a distance, it is enough to make people tremble. The Antolian workers have already built a not-so-high platform on this open space. After all, although Antolian is short of money now, this is at least the first awarding ceremony, so it has to be a bit impressive. In addition to Leon, the guests who attended the awarding ceremony included Archmage Albert, Moon Elf Envoy Clemente, Ximena family steward Aaron, Cardinal Matthews of Antolia, Viscount Philip Ximena of Shuanghu Town, Sherman, the first technical noble of Antolia and a dwarf craftsman with the title of Honorary Knight, as well as many serving and resigned officers of the Antolia army, vassals of neighboring Antolia, government officials, and readers who subscribed to this book. In short, most of those who should come have already come, and those who should not come have not been invited at all. Amid the cheers of the subjects and the gaze of the Antolia soldiers, Leon, dressed in a noble robe, slowly walked up to the high platform and personally awarded the titles or medals to the officers who had made military achievements. Titles, medals, money, honors. Leon will naturally give the rewards that should be given, and none of them will be left out. However, Antolia has its own national conditions, and the Ximena family under Leon's leadership naturally has its own difficulties. Even if he was made a noble, he was only an honorary noble. However, the noble vassals who were invited to participate might not understand this, but the people of Antolia knew it very well. What was Antolia like in the past? The hounds attacked, life was difficult, food was scarce, and income was meager. But now Antolia has changed. Which town was not built with the money paid by the Lord with tears, and which road was not paved and which industry was not launched by Leon? Everything in Antolia was built by the Ximena family. Who would dare to ask for it? Who would dare to ask for it? If it weren't for Leon, countless people in Antolia would have starved or died in battle. So in the simple and pure moral values of the Antolians, a manor is enough. If you want something else, it would be a bit too greedy. Chapter 227, Clan seems to understand something. Leon has never been stingy with his rewards for the soldiers who have fought for the Ximena family. Andrew was awarded the title of Honorary Viscount in recognition of his outstanding contribution in leading the Lapric Legion to enter the abandoned land first, and in leading the Lapric warriors to guard the south bank of the Myrcid River when Leon went north. Stein and Juan were also awarded the title of Honorary Viscount, but because they had followed Leon to the north to Norton before, they played an important role in both the capture of Bolton and the attack on White Rock Creek, so they were also awarded the Arthur Ximena Medal. Well, a medal named after Leon's father. This is also an old tradition of Antolia. Naming it after Arthur Ximena can not only demonstrate the sovereignty and influence of the Ximena family on Antolia, but also reflect Leon's filial piety. Of course, in addition to Stein and Juan, Aaron and Todd also received one each. The reason is simple. Todd, who gradually retired after achieving success, is still the second in command of the Antolian army after Leon. He even has the merit of support of inviting Leon back from the city of Parma, so naturally it will not cause discussion from others. Even though he was unable to come to the ceremony because he was in the abandoned land at this time, no one was dissatisfied with it. As for Aaron, although the butler of the Ximena family has never been on the battlefield, he has made extraordinary contributions to Antolia, and a medal is naturally deserved. You know, the medal awarded by Leon is definitely not a simple decoration. The surface of the medal is made of gold taken from the sunken wood forest, and the magic materials inlaid inside and the magic circuits engraved on it can even form a weak magic barrier for a short time in times of crisis. Its principle is roughly the same as the stone tablet of the Lapric tribe. Note, Chapter 144, although it is much inferior to the magic barrier that Leon personally drew at that time, which could cover the entire old city of Thorn territory, it must be said that this is the first batch of personal accessories with magical properties that the wizards and dwarf craftsmen of Antolia have forged with all their efforts and for a long time. It is also an attempt made by the Antolians to use the principles of magic engineering under the guidance of Ximena's thoughts. And obviously, the effect is not cheap. In addition to awarding medals, Leon even led a group of generals and officials to personally issue high pensions and Antolian hero medals to the families of all Antolian soldiers who died in this battle. Although these medals issued in large quantities are far less precious than Arthur Ximena medals, the descendants of these soldiers can use them as a certificate to obtain priority admission to literacy classes. After all, with the current financial resources of the Ximena family, it is impossible to do any universal literacy. At most it is a small-scale literacy class. Since only a small number of people can be selected from the countless people, the descendants of the fallen soldiers should naturally receive special care. However, what everyone present did not expect was that after the medals of the generals who participated in the war were awarded, the medal awarding ceremony did not end at all. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, a plump woman in simple clothes walked to Leon's side with trembling steps. Obviously, this is a civilian. The wrinkles on the woman's face, the calluses on her hands and the trembling eyes are the best proof of her true identity. And what she received was the Medal of Glorious Mother awarded by Leon himself. As for her contribution, you know, in just a few decades, this plump woman gave birth to 7 children. How can this not be commended? Exclamation mark. Although encouraging childbirth can have a much smaller effect on increasing the population than accepting refugees. But this does not mean that Leon has given up his efforts on the former. The Glorious Mother Medal was Leon's recognition of the Antolian woman, and the monetary reward of 20 escudos gold coins awarded to her was a reflection of Leon's attitude. In addition, a series of policies in Anatolia have actually begun to be formulated. For example, raising more children can get tax exemptions, and families with children under 3 years old can get 1 gold coin per year, which is equivalent to a subsidy of 100 Andal silver coins. There are many such policies. Once the assessment of the population of Anatolia and the financial situation of the Ximena family is completed, it will be implemented in the entire territory controlled by the Ximena family. As the earliest Norton citizen to serve the Ximena family, Cland was lucky to be one of the first officials to come to the ceremony. Standing under the high platform, he felt that he was particularly excited. After all, only a year ago, he was just an ordinary tavern owner living in Navarra City, the Principality of Norton. In his past life experience, Cland had also seen many ways in which Norton nobles managed their territories. But to be honest, Leon's approach was almost an eye-opener for him. He had never seen any territory where the people could admire their lord so much. Yes, in addition to awe, Cland could clearly see some admiration and love in the eyes of the Antolians. This was something that no other noble territory had ever seen. From the south bank of the Myrson River to the southwest highlands, and from the southwest highlands to the old city of the Thorn territory, everything in Anatolia completely exceeded his expectations. In his opinion, this land was filled with a very special atmosphere. Perhaps it was just a slightly ignorant feeling in the past, and it was hard to tell what kind of atmosphere it was. However, when he came to the Thorn territory, he finally realized that this was probably a peculiar atmosphere of vitality and competition that other noble territories had never had. The Antolians were indeed tough, but they were not arrogant. The Ximena family did oppress, but they had principles. Cland raised his head and looked up at the young noble who was standing on the high platform and awarding a civilian woman with a medal. At this moment, he seemed to finally understand Leon's governance philosophy. The Marquis established a series of rules and regulations in his territory that were not too harsh. And he, Cland, and his colleagues around him, were the executors of these rules and regulations, and the arms that conveyed the orders of the Ximena family to the ears of the people. If this goes on, does this land really need to have nobles? This thought that suddenly appeared in his mind startled Cland. Cland didn't know why he had such an outrageous idea after attending an awarding ceremony. But, in an instant, he seemed to have a great motivation in his heart for no reason. And, Chapter 228 Leon feels this is unreasonable. As a declining nobleman, Cland had much more experience than ordinary civilians. Therefore, he always had his own understanding of everything that happened around him. In his opinion, the reason why vassals existed was not because of anything since ancient times, but purely because more powerful lords needed to rely on vassals to control distant lands. But now, the young Marquis seemed to want to change his way. And this idea was also verified in this awarding ceremony. After all, the titles bestowed by the Ximena family were almost all honorary titles, and the actual land granted, even if there was any, was just one piece of noble manor after another. And on the south bank of the Myrson River, the land that should have been bestowed on the vassal according to common sense, also briefly became another direct territory of the Ximena family because of the so-called the remnants of the restoration of the country have not been completely wiped out. As the earliest Norton who joined the Ximena family, Cland naturally knew whether there were any remnants of the restoration of the country on that land. Combined with what he saw and heard on the way to Thorn Ridge, Cland naturally deduced such a possibility. What literacy classes, what collective learning, etc., all of these are paving the way for this ultimate goal. And Cland even heard that the Marquis on the stage had reached an agreement on defense outsourcing with many of his vassals. In fact, if it were someone else, they would probably be shocked by Leon's decision that violated their ancestors. However, for Cland, this became an opportunity in his eyes, An opportunity he would never allow himself to miss. Under this framework that León tailored for the actual controlled territory of the Ximena family, the difficulty of becoming the chief executive of a place is obviously much lower than that of becoming a real noble in the past. Especially in the context of the current shortage of talents in Antolians, the difficulty has dropped sharply. Wasn't Balo, the former mayor of the mining town and the current chief executive of Eiderport, an orphan that no one wanted before? Exclamation mark. Thinking of this, Clan's eyes couldn't help but emerge with an ambitious fighting spirit. He doesn't want to be the guy at the bottom forever. One day, he will also sit in the front row. At this moment, Clan made up his mind. The end of the awarding ceremony does not mean that León finally ushered in the long-lost leisure. Looking at the pile of letters and reports placed in his study, León felt particularly tired. After all, it has been several months since he left the territory. Even though he has great confidence in Aaron's loyalty and ability, many things still require León, as the Lord, to review them personally. Because many replies are not something Aaron can make on his own. For example, the letter from the elf queen Alicia. Alicia wrote a letter to León specifically to ask him why the elves dispelled the black fog after using the shadow manipulator, and although the leaves of the world tree no longer withered, there were still no new leaves sprouting. Of course not. Because the moon elves do not have additional services related to the land compactor. But Aaron, as an official, certainly couldn't answer like that. He could only use words like his lord was away fighting. Another example is Earl Eli Wayne of Greywater Castle. Since León went to war, the old guy has sent a letter from León almost every 2 or 3 days, asking if León is well. Of course he is still alive. After reading more than 20 letters full of greetings from Earl Greywater Castle, León felt more and more overwhelmed. In fact, this is understandable. As the earliest noble vassal to reach a defense outsourcing agreement with the Ximena family, Earl Greywater Castle can be said to have bet his life and even his heir on León, so he naturally pays special attention. As for the others, there are also garrisons stationed in Wilson Castle claiming to have found traces of New, and asking León if he needs to further explore. There is also Master Kerman in the potion production workshop who wants to apply for a drop of Moon Goddess's tier for potion research and development. There were also a lot of nobles who wrote to ask León if he wanted a wife. Anyway, looking at the pile of letters in front of him, León finally decided to go eat first. It must be said that the chef of the Ximena family can be said to be the guy who makes León the least worried. In just a few months, I don't know if it's because León ate too much jerky or too much military rations, he just felt that the chef's cooking skills were getting better and better, and León felt a little tearful when eating. Just when León finally put aside a lot of things and focused on eating, he saw the great wizard Albert rushing to him. "Teacher, let's eat together." León raised his fork and waved it, determined to change the subject first. "Mr. Marcus." Albert smiled. And this also made León vaguely feel a little bad. The reason is simple. As long as Albert has nothing to ask for, he will directly call him León. After all, León was Albert's student before. As a great wizard, Albert is definitely qualified to call him that. But if he calls him Marcus right away, then he will probably bleed a little. What's more, it is said that the wizards of Anatolia have already built a framework of a shadow monster trap covering dozens of acres near the southern mountains of Anatolia under Albert's repeated urging a few days ago. So if León is right, Albert is here this time, most likely to fulfill his promise. "Marcus, the magic academy you mentioned before." Sure enough. They have been teachers and students for a long time. Before Albert even opened his mouth, León knew what he was thinking. Has the shadow monster trap been built? It has started to run. The white-bearded old man raised his head, looking particularly arrogant. "Take me to see it." Hearing this, León put down the cutlery in his hand without hesitation and walked out of the castle. It was not to use his actual actions to forcibly change the topic, but mainly because the ancient archives had not had any shadow monsters foraging in it for a long time. The more shadow monsters there were, the faster the black fog in the archives would dissipate. This golden finger has not brought any sense of existence to me for a long time. Moreover, regarding the ancient archives, León actually had a question in his heart. If these things, especially the shadow manipulator that can dispel the black fog, were really what the ancestors once mastered, then why did the ancestors thousands of years ago disappear under the invasion of the black fog? This is really unreasonable. Not today. Chapter 229 Shadow Monster Trap. In Leon's original expectation, the shadow monster trap was roughly equivalent to a trap. And as we all know, traps are generally not too big. However, when he finally saw the shadow monster trap at the foot of the southern mountain surrounded by a group of guards and mages, Leon's heart was quite shocked. He felt that his previous thoughts might be a little metaphysical. Who said that the trap can't be big? Maybe things like traps are really small, but they are used to catch shadow monsters. What's more, shadow monsters should be classified as a kind of magical creature in theory, and if you want to trap magical creatures, you naturally need magic circuits. And obviously, the larger the area, the easier it is to draw the magic circuit. This is like a chip. The more sophisticated it is, the more difficult it is. There is obviously a small difference in difficulty between engraving runes on something the size of a fingernail and engraving runes directly on the square. Anatolia is not short of land now. What's more, the shadow monster was specifically requested by his lord to be caught, so, how should I put it? From a distance, the area and scale of the building were somewhat outrageous. In the center was a tower that was more than 20 meters high. It was engraved with various patterns that flashed with various colors. It was a masterpiece made by ancient magic. And around the shadow monster trap, there were also a large number of soldiers patrolling, and the level of strictness was even higher than that of the old city of Thornridge. The nightmare fuel that can attract shadow monsters is stored in that tower. Albert took the initiative to introduce it with great interest. The walls of that tower are engraved with magic circuits that function similar to release, which can spread the breath of nightmare fuel to dozens of kilometers away, thereby attracting more shadow monsters. It's equivalent to a bait. Leon concluded. Yes. Albert nodded quickly. Please look, Marcus. There are many low pyramidal stone piles around the tower. They are all made of warm stones, and then the magic circuits on the surface of the stone piles are very similar to the lapric steel engraved by the mages and mage apprentices of Anatolia. Looking in the direction of Albert's finger, a large area of densely packed buildings less than 1 meter high, but shaped like miniature pyramids, with a central tower as the center, continuously extending outward. You know, the reason why the lapric steel can release a holy light barrier is mainly because of the holy light magic rune you personally engraved on it. Whenever this magic rune is activated, it is enough to affect all the magic factors with light element attributes around it, thus forming a defensive barrier that can cover the entire Thorn Ridge, and this is actually the essential principle of those warm stone traps. For a long time, the reason for the birth of shadow monsters has always been a point of great dispute among many mages, but the mages have long reached a consensus on the cold and oppressive dark attributes of the shadow monsters themselves. The two elements of light and darkness are essentially a relationship of unity of opposites. Therefore, under the design of the mage apprentice, whenever a shadow monster approaches, the cold breath emitted by the shadow monster will activate these magic rune circuits, thereby using the completely opposite magic factors that the shadow monster fears to trap it in place. Albert finished speaking in one breath, and then looked at Leon with curiosity. Each warm stone square tower can only capture one shadow monster at a time. Yes, Albert replied. However, there are hundreds of warm stone towers here. As long as the mages continue to consume their mental power to use magic, thereby reducing their own mental power to below a certain threshold, they will be able to see the existence of the shadow monster in the blurry vision, and then seal it in a container. So, these warm stone towers can actually be used repeatedly. And what surprised me is that, in fact, the more traps are triggered, the breath of nightmare fuel will be mixed with a trace of light element magic that the shadow monster does not like. So it stands to reason that the utilization rate of these warm stone towers should not exceed 60%. However, in reality, the utilization rate can reach 100%. Hearing this, a strange color flashed in Leon's eyes. In just a moment, the world in sight changed color. Countless shadow monsters trapped in the traps were wailing miserably, violently colliding with the magic cages formed by the light attribute magic factors. After observing for a long time, Leon felt that he seemed to understand the reason for the high utilization rate. The mentality of the shadow monsters is probably a bit similar to treasure hunting. The more traps are triggered, the stronger the interference caused by the light element magic factors mixed in them while feeling the nightmare fuel. This can make many shadow monsters more yearning. After all, the greater the risk, the greater the reward. For example, the gold mine in the sunken wood forest. All gold diggers are aware of the existence of the tree guards in the sunken wood forest. But they still rushed forward without hesitation. Because of the existence of the tree guards, It has enhanced the credibility of the existence of the gold mine to a certain extent. Similarly, the more traps there are, the more the shadow monsters feel that if they can successfully approach the bait, they can achieve strength growth with the help of the bait. This is reasonable. Very reasonable. Well done. Leon couldn't help but sigh. With a sufficient number of shadow monsters, his exploration of the ancient archives can continue. Leon didn't know what percentage of the entire ancient archives the area he was exploring now occupied. But what he knew was that whether it was the shadow manipulator or the land compactor, whether it was the scientific instrument or the ancient magic runes he got out of the ancient archives, they all brought considerable help to his farming business. It improved the land, dispelled the black fog, and even made ancient magic appear in front of the Antolian wizard for the first time. So, Leon was actually really looking forward to it. After he completely dispelled the black fog in the ancient archives, what would appear in front of him? Was it the reason why the ancestors disappeared, or was it some kind of technology that could change this era? Leon didn't know. But what he knew was that he had to speed up his exploration of the ancient archives. My Lord Marcus. However, Albert's words interrupted his thoughts. Leon turned around and looked at his teacher with a little confusion. That, Magic Academy. At this moment, Albert's eyes flashed with an extremely eager light. And, if you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 230, Antolia Higher School of Magic in Leon's Eyes. In order to bring this great wizard to Antolia and make him work for the Ximena family, Leon had already planted a seed in his heart. And the seed is to build an Antolia Higher School of Magic. This is what Albert has always been thinking about. And now, the completion of the shadow monster trap finally gave Albert hope that Leon would fulfill his promise. Of course. Leon nodded seriously. Although the speed of the completion of the shadow monster trap can be said to be completely beyond Leon's expectations, it can definitely be regarded as a good thing. Leon has always been a person who keeps his promises. And to be honest, even if Albert didn't exist, he would sooner or later build an Antolia Higher School of Magic on this land. The world in front of him is a completely different world from Leon's previous life. There's magic here, various phenomena that are difficult to explain by natural science, as well as diffuse black fog and disappeared ancestors. The most critical point, which is also what Leon is most concerned about, is that this world may not have the conditions required to develop Earth technology. Leon has not found the sulfur saltpeter needed to prepare gunpowder anywhere until now. Even those things that are shared with the Earth, such as coal, have different properties from the coal on the Earth. It is for this reason that the second-generation steam engine of Antolia uses nightmare fuel instead of the coal that people are accustomed to. And nightmare fuel is the product of the condensation of black fog, and the black fog may hide various secrets that Leon has not yet discovered. All of this requires Leon to change his thinking. It is obviously not feasible to copy the technology tree on the Earth, so Leon must combine the characteristics of this world. For example, potion science, such as magic engineering. The application of magic power and the existence of magic materials make it possible to develop magic engineering and related industries, and also let Leon see a new direction for the development of the technology tree. Admittedly, relying on Antolia's current talent pool is not enough to support the development of an entire discipline. But nothing can be accomplished overnight. In Leon's view, Antolia can start from the smallest place. Who said how big the scale should be? Plan out a piece of land and build a few houses. As long as the scientific research resources are sufficient, there will be progress. Isn't the little red bottle of Antolia and the huge shadow monster trap in front of us all made in this way? At worst, we can build a new campus later. However, considering his previous promise, Leon took the initiative to ask, "Teacher, do you have any ideas?" Hearing this, Albert couldn't help but be stunned. He is a great wizard, which means that Albert has superior magical strength, but this does not mean that he is equally good in other aspects. For example, at this moment, Albert's mind is full of the beautiful picture that Leon once described to him, which is the final result described by Leon to him. But how to do the process? How long will this process take? These things, Albert has never thought about. Therefore, Leon's straightforward answer and sudden questions caught the old wizard off guard. This Teacher, you didn't have any plans before, did you? A strange look flashed across Leon's face, and he asked knowingly. Albert. Seeing this, Leon immediately became interested. Site selection. Initial scale. Which mages do you plan to bring over to teach together? How do you plan to recruit mages as apprentices? Ahem. Albert coughed awkwardly. Of course the Ximena family is willing to fund the establishment of an Antolian higher school of magic, but you should also know that many things cannot be solved by the Ximena family's manpower and efforts, and this also requires your cooperation. Leon said as a matter of course. Then what should we do first? Hearing this, Albert's eagerness in his eyes could not help but weaken a little, and he became a little more confused and hesitant. First of all, we need to choose a good location. This matter is directly related to the teacher, so please take some time to walk around the two banks of the White Blade River. Since we have decided to build, even if we just build a few small buildings at the beginning, we need to carefully select the location. After all, Antolia Higher School of Magic, as soon as you hear the name, the surrounding land will be a good school district house in the future. Then manpower and money. Don't worry. Leon responded without hesitation, since we have promised the teacher, the Ximena family will definitely fulfill their promise even if they have to sell everything they have or borrow money to raise funds. Hearing this, although Albert's eyes were not filled with tears, he could not help but feel touched. Before, he thought that his student was just blindly drawing cakes for himself. But what he didn't expect was that at this critical moment, Leon would agree so readily, and it was Albert himself who failed. And this is the effect Leon wanted. You know, he had been planning to borrow money for development for a long time. It was obviously a foolish dream to complete the development of the entire abandoned land with the financial resources of the Ximena family alone. Therefore, Leon naturally had to borrow money. And he was not afraid of borrowing too much, but too little. For this reason, as early as when the Antolian army marched westward, Leon had already tried the water by issuing war bonds. The water temperature was okay. Now, with the end of the war, Antolian finances have temporarily become abundant, and even many people who want to redeem in advance have received the money they invested previously. This is undoubtedly a good start, and it has left a pretty good reputation for the first batch of bonds issued by Antolian. Therefore, the issuance of bonds for the development of the abandoned land was naturally included in Leon's next plan. One is to tie more nobles to Antolian warships, and the other is to speed up and increase the efficiency of the development of the abandoned land. After all, the abandoned land is not just the Moon Elves. According to the information sent back by Antolia's ambassador to Moon Shadow Forest, Jorni, compared to the Walrus people far to the north of the kingdom, the other races living in the abandoned land are a much closer threat than the Walrus people. Chapter 231 Leon has great ambitions. Leon proposed the new idea for the establishment of the Antolia Higher School of Magic. It seemed to prove his good character of honesty and trustworthiness, and it seemed to confirm his desire to fulfill his promise. The next morning, when the sky just showed a hint of white, the sleepy Albert was awakened by the waiter sent by Leon. Although older people often have poor sleep, they usually get up early in the morning. But the problem is that Albert was so excited that he didn't sleep all night, so he simply picked up a magic book and read it until dawn. As a result, he just lay down and was disturbed by the people sent by Leon. So when the great wizard finally saw Leon in the study with an excited look on his face, his whole head was still a little confused. Teacher. At this moment, Leon's eyes seemed to flash with a different luster. As he spoke, Leon reached out and handed a manuscript with ink that had not yet dried to Albert. This is a plan for the establishment of the Antolia Higher School of Magic that Aaron and I drafted overnight. Leon said seriously. Plan. This time, Albert really didn't expect that his lord would act so quickly. But this is exactly where Leon's idea lies. Just like yesterday on the side of the shadow monster trap, he first laid out all the difficulties that would be faced in the establishment of the school, so that Albert understood one thing. That is, apart from magic, his abilities in other aspects are not outstanding. After all, the establishment of a school requires consideration of all aspects. And these particularly scattered trivialities naturally made this proud archmage realize his shortcomings for the first time, and even produced a series of emotions that made him feel helpless. Then, Leon appeared at the right time and in the right place. This gave Albert a very clear idea, that is, without Leon, or without the support of the Ximena family, the Antolia Higher School of Magic would definitely not be able to be established anyway. This can probably be regarded as a kind of PPT. After a long silence, Albert wondered, why is the location of the Antolia Higher School of Magic located on the edge of the new city of Thorn territory? Of course, it is to raise the land price. When hearing Albert's question, the answer flashed in Leon's mind. However, he still gave his answer very sincerely, because this is bound to become the first and largest magic training school in the entire Andal Kingdom and even the entire northern continent. If it is confined in the city, wouldn't it be a limited area before construction begins? Leon gave a matter-of-fact answer, and there seemed to be a little blame in his eyes, making Albert feel that his previous thoughts seemed to be a little petty. Look at the plan of the Marcus. In Leon's initial conception, the Antolia Higher School of Magic will have 4 major colleges under its jurisdiction at the beginning of its establishment. They are the School of Potion, the School of Magic Engineering, the School of Ancient Magic, and the School of Continuing Education. The planned area is almost equivalent to a quarter of the new city of Thornridge. It is expected to accommodate more than 1,500 wizard apprentices. Albert couldn't help but gasp for the Norton noble. This number is a bit outrageous. I'm afraid that the entire Andal Kingdom can only gather so many people, right? As long as the mage apprentice is willing to come, Antolia is willing to accept them all. Leon waved his hand and said without hesitation, planning is planning, and reality is reality. Leon's ambitions have always been big. After all, how can you draw a big pie if it's not big? According to Leon's estimate, if there can be 30 students in the first year of enrollment, it would be a cause for celebration, and if it can fool 50 people, it can be regarded as a universal celebration. In addition, the manuscript has a lot of various rules and regulations and positioning requirements, many of which make Albert feel more and more surprised the more he reads. I want to visit the other great wizards and mages. After a moment of silence, Albert stared at a request drafted by Leon and pointed at himself with some confusion. With each additional wizard, the probability of success will be a little higher. Antolia is no longer the same as it was before. If the teacher can personally spread the news of the Antolia Higher School of Magic throughout the kingdom, and even let the wizards you know donate enthusiastically, I believe this matter will surely go a lot more smoothly. Leon put on a good look. Donate enthusiastically. Yes. Leon nodded with confidence. If there is a wizard who is willing to donate to support the construction of the magic school, then his name will be engraved on the monument of the completion of the Antolia Higher School of Magic, and the name of the library of this magic school will also be named after the wizard who donated the most. After all, building a magic school and developing abandoned land are 2 different things. Even if Leon can manipulate it after the bond is issued and embezzle some funds quietly, the amount will not be too much after all. So, get more money if you can. This is the core idea that Leon outlined during the construction of the Antolia Higher School of Magic. You know, even a great wizard like Albert can be attracted by the beautiful blueprint drawn by Leon. Leon didn't believe it. Would the other wizards be moved at all? No way, no way. Walking out of Leon's study, Albert seemed to be able to feel his heart beating violently. But after a moment, he seemed to suddenly realize something. That is, although Leon said it very well, after this repeated detour, how could the task of going out to raise funds fall on his head so easily? As a benchmark city built by the Ximena family in the abandoned land, Fort Wilson, located northwest of the Moon Shadow Forest, has always been the focus of the Ximena family's construction. With a lush world tree as the center, newly built houses are rising in the city like mushrooms after rain. Once upon a time, the lush world tree was a symbol of the elves. And now, compared to the world tree growing in the Moon Shadow Forest, the one growing in Fort Wilson seems to be the one that truly reflects the vitality of the world tree. With the arrival of midsummer, a touch of rich green seems to cover the entire city under the extension of branches. In the distance, the hazy black fog seems to be mixed with a repressed breath of death. In the near distance, the noise of the crowd came into Leon's ears one after another. Leon has always felt that the Antolians are the most creative people on this land. This is not a narrow regional concept, but a broad identity. Under the governance of the Ximena family, or under Leon, Antolia is no longer just a remote aristocratic territory on the edge of the kingdom. It is indeed far away from the heart of the kingdom, but it is full of choices and opportunities. As a city that has just been developed and built by the Antolians, Fort Wilson is even more so. The city walls are being built and the houses are being extended. The whole city seemed like a huge construction site, and the branches and leaves of the world tree covered most of the city, blocking the scorching sun outside the city, so that the efficiency of the workers was greatly improved. Improving the working environment is a yes. At this moment, a huge team that had never been seen before had passed through the Baragori Pass and appeared outside the city of Wilsonburg. The first to react were the skeletons outside the city. Looking at the long team, the skeletons put down their hoes, tilted their heads, and seemed to reveal a little confusion in their empty eye sockets. There are so many people. The skeletons have never seen so many people. So much so that they seem to have some disagreements on continuing to farm and observing humans. This directly led to the skeletons starting to twist their necks to each other, and occasionally pulling off a head. Leon watched this ridiculous scene between the skeletons from a distance, and his mood suddenly relaxed a lot. After sending Albert away, Leon personally led the soldiers of Anatolia and escorted countless prisoners of war from the Kingdom of Walrus to Fort Wilson. It must be said that although it has only been a few months, the changes in Fort Wilson are amazing. Although defensive facilities such as city walls are just in their infancy, there is actually a prototype of a large, even giant city. As long as these prisoners of war from the Kingdom of Walrus are added to the team building the city, the labor force of Fort Wilson is bound to usher in a new round of search. You know, compared with other cities under the rule of the Ximena family, what Leon values most about Fort Wilson is the construction of the city wall. After all, even now, no one can tell how many races live in the abandoned land. Not only Leon doesn't know, I'm afraid even the moon elves who have lived in the abandoned land for generations don't know the answer to this question. Before the black fog spread, there were humans, elves, orcs, dwarves, and even dragons on this land. But now, the diffuse black fog blocked the line of sight and cut off the connection. If the Antolians had not returned to this land with the help of the shadow manipulator that could dispel the black fog, the elves would probably still be sealed in the moon shadow forest and continue their lives under the black fog. However, not all races are like the proud moon elves. For example, shadow monsters. According to the moon elves, the shadow monsters gathered in the abandoned land often riot, and the elves call this phenomenon shadow monster riot. You know, not all shadow monsters are harmless to humans and animals like the low-level shadow monsters caught by the shadow monster trap. In the process of the shadow monsters swallowing the black fog, their appearance and characteristics will undergo some special changes under the influence of the black fog. The elves call it specialization. How did the shadow monster that Leon stuffed into the ancient archives disappear? Isn't it because the shadow monster transformed into a special entity similar to a black beetle after swallowing a lot of black fog? But in Leon's opinion, this change is not without benefits. Because this kind of shadow monster that has undergone specific changes can randomly drop enchantment materials after death, this is a real good thing. Whether it is a melee weapon or a ranged weapon, whether it is enchanted or not, the lethality it can bring to the enemy is completely different, and it has long been verified in actual combat. So what Leon is most concerned about is not the shadow monster riot itself, but the frequency, time and possible location of the shadow monster riot. After all, even the elves who are self-satisfied can firmly survive in the shadow monster riots again and again. It should not be too difficult for the Antolians to get some benefits from it. Todd stood in front of the gate of Wilsonburg. Looking at the Marcus who came from afar, and looking at the laborers behind Leon, the face of the veteran was almost instantly happy. You know, after the Laprid Corps led by Andrew withdrew one after another, as the key project of the Ximena family in recent years, Todd, the former head of the mercenaries, personally guarded here, so that he missed the awarding ceremony a few days ago. Tens of thousands of prisoners of war are enough to be reorganized into nearly 100 production and construction brigades. The huge population can completely take the deterrence of the Antorians to a higher level. I plan to use these people to build the walls of Fort Wilson first. Fort Wilson can be said to be fully militarized now. Even if there are many prisoners of war, it will definitely not cause much trouble in this land surrounded by black fog. As soon as he saw Leon, he vowed to guarantee it. There are tens of thousands of prisoners of war. Even if Leon has sufficient confidence in the assimilation ability of Antorian culture, to be honest, it is absolutely impossible not to worry. This is why he placed all the prisoners of war in the abandoned land. As long as the Baragori Pass is under the control of the Antorians, the abandoned land will not be in trouble. In addition, the Walrus people have always believed that the strong are respected. As a defeated general of the Antorians, León is also confident that these tough prisoners of war will become a member of the Antorians. You deserve the medal. León did not comment on Todd's assurance. He just stretched out his hand and handed the carefully carved Arthur Ximena medal to Todd. However, compared with a harmonious communication between León and Todd, the prisoners were not calm. Just like at this moment, there was obviously a touch of fear on their faces. Not to mention the black fog around them, just the skeletons carrying hoes were enough to make the prisoners' brains crash on the spot. What kind of people are Antillians? Almost the moment they set foot on this land, the prisoners had this idea in their hearts. Even though they were used to fighting in the kingdom of Walrus, everything in the abandoned land was completely beyond their imagination. The computer was on strike these 2 days, and typing on the phone felt so awkward and slow. It should be back to normal tomorrow. Chapter 232. Hussein wants to change his fate. At noon in Fort Wilson, it was far less hot than in Antillia. Goodal Hussein, who had been tired for most of the day, was sitting on a stone pier outside the city, chewing a piece of dry black bread. In front of him, the skeletons outside the city were waving their hoes stiffly. From the initial astonishment to the current commonplace, Hussein didn't know how he had achieved a change in his mind. Perhaps it was because everything that was happening on this land was too sensational? Under León's order, the officials of Anatolia would preach to the prisoners of war every few days. On the one hand, it was to explain the temporary prisoner policy formulated by Anatolia, and on the other hand, it was to introduce everything that happened on this land. Here, the stupid skeletons waved farm tools, and the hard-working craftsmen planned the city. Occasionally, they could even see elves that they had never seen before, hurriedly walking on the street. Everything in front of him brought an extremely strong and inexplicable shock to Hussein's heart. As a prisoner of war from the kingdom of Walrus, he was incorporated by the Anatolians into the newly established Wilsonburg 7th Production and Construction Brigade, mainly involved in the construction of the western wall of Wilsonburg. Although Hussein was also terrified when he first came to this land. But now, Hussein, like other Walrus prisoners of war, has no dissatisfaction with his life after becoming a prisoner of war, but feels a little fortunate. The reason is that in the land of the kingdom of Walrus, he is just an insignificant slave. Not to mention owning his own property, even his own life is completely controlled by the Walrus nobles. And now, although they are the same, but at least the ruler of this land, the Antillian Marquis of the Ximena family, has given enough promises to the prisoners of war. As long as they can complete the tasks required by the Ximena family, or accumulate enough work points in this day-to-day labor, then as long as they are willing to swear allegiance to the Ximena family, they can have the status of free men and become the subjects of the Ximena family. For all the prisoners of war, such a promise can be said to be unthinkable, especially for Goodal Hussein. You know, just a few decades ago, he was also a Walrus noble. Even a second-class Doran noble. But, as people know, even though the Gulen family relied on the powerful family power to maintain the existence of the Walrus kingdom, the conflicts between tribes within this kingdom have never stopped. His surname is Hussein. This was once the surname of a powerful tribe in the Walrus kingdom. But no matter how powerful the tribe is, it is impossible to be strong forever. In addition, the Gulen family has always supported small tribes and weakened large tribes as its strategy for governing the country and the main means of maintaining the system. Therefore, Hussein's tribe eventually became a thing of the past in the process of repeated suppression, and most of the members of the tribe became humble slaves. Even if he was a second-class Doran, it was the same. In fact, the Walrus kingdom also left some thoughts for the slaves. If enough heads can be obtained in the war, then perhaps the status of slaves can be escaped by virtue of the merits in the war. Even if the so-called guarantee is really just a light promise, even if the requirements are met, it may be obstructed by hostile tribes, but this is the only hope of us slave soldiers. It is precisely because of this that Goodal Hussein participated in this war, that he actually did not know why it started. However, what he did not expect, or what all Walrus people did not expect, was that with the end of the war, the Walrus kingdom obtained the land north of the Chilin River, but they became prisoners of war in the hands of the Antillians. Before this, Goodal Hussein did not know what he would face. Because he actually didn't care in his heart. Decades of slavery have long raised his psychological endurance to a level that ordinary people can hardly reach. In order to survive, he lost his wealth, dignity, wife and children. He even worked as a boiling sheep responsible for pushing his butt. But he survived all this. because he always remembered the meaning of the surname Hussein. Death is not terrible, but if revenge is not completed before death, it is the most shameful death. Until he and the other prisoners of war passed the south bank of the Myrson River, crossed the southwest highlands, crossed the Baragori Pass, and finally came to this land that was enough to subvert the worldview of ordinary people. The promise of the Ximena family gave him hope. He didn't understand why the Antolians were called the walrus people of the Andal kingdom. But what he knew was that the rulers of this land were not like other Andal nobles, who were particularly afraid of their walrus prisoners of war while humiliating them in every way. So at this time, he had only one idea, that is, to obtain the status of a free man, and then realize his revenge. Even though this goal sounds like a fantasy. But he always insisted, and he firmly believed that he would be able to do it one day. After all, León did not close the door to becoming Antolian soldiers to the prisoners of war. Obviously, if he could get rid of his status as a prisoner of war and become a member of the Antolian army as soon as possible, then it would not be impossible to achieve his revenge by following the Marquis who had caused the kingdom of Walrus a great loss. While thinking, Hussein ate the particularly dry and hard black bread. With the development of Anatolia, this kind of food is no longer the only staple food of the Antolians. But for prisoners of war, this is good enough. Because in the kingdom of Walrus, slaves have no human rights. Even if they have to do the hardest, most tiring and dirtiest work, it is almost impossible to fill their stomachs. Perhaps it is for this reason that even in the army of the kingdom of Walrus, the slave soldiers want to get rid of their status as slaves by virtue of military merit, but no matter how strong their determination is, their shriveled stomachs make them unable to raise a trace of strength. It is precisely because of this tiny difference in details that these prisoners of war from the kingdom of Walrus have developed an unspeakable trust in the promises made by León that have not yet been fulfilled. There is no way their lives now are even better than when they were in the kingdom of Walrus. And Chapter 233, the wonderful scene of the abandoned land of Wildboar Riding Bull. In fact, at the beginning, Todd and his lord had some differences on the issue of treating prisoners of war. As an Antolian veteran who had followed León's father, Arthur Ximena, to fight on the battlefield, Todd has always been a representative of the conservative forces in Antolian. So in his opinion, the treatment of prisoners of war must be reduced as much as possible. As Tokugawa Ieyasu once said, keeping the peasants half dead is the secret of politics. Todd's idea is the same. Let the prisoners of war starve, so that they will try their best for the occasional trifles. Even if this causes rebellion, in the abandoned land where the Ximena family has the final say, the Antolian army is enough to rely on absolute strength to resolutely suppress the hungry prisoners of war. But León put forward a different view. He admitted that Todd's considerations are indeed reasonable, but now is far from the time to stagnate development for the sake of stable rule. With better treatment, the prisoners will be more motivated, and the promises of the Ximena family will be more credible. What's more, the daily food provided is just black bread. This kind of treatment is not good, right? Only with strength can we work. Compared with the money and food consumed, León cares more about the progress of the project. And León knows better that the reason why the Ximena family has been able to develop to its current level is due to the toughness and diligence of the Antolians. If these walrus prisoners of war can be assimilated into the Antolians, then this land ruled by the Ximena family will surely usher in the highest quality population growth in history. And it is obvious that, at least so far, León's approach has received extremely positive feedback. The slaves don't care about the identity of the walrus people. They have experienced the pain of being slaves, and naturally they will not have any expectations for the walrus kingdom. And now, since the Antolians have given them the opportunity to regain their dignity, most people will use their actual actions to prove their worth to León. You are right. Looking at the construction progress that far exceeded expectations, Todd said sincerely. So, how is the tracking of the cattle going? I heard that the scouts sent out have returned. Facing Todd's words, León just nodded, and then changed the subject very straightforwardly. He did not object to the other suggestions of the vassals in the territory. Because in many cases, perhaps because of being a time traveler, the policies formulated by León were inevitably radical. It was precisely because Todd, Aaron and others pulled from behind that they were able to formulate a saying that was more in line with the actual situation in Anatolia. During this period, the scouts of Anatolia have been setting out from Fort Wilson and exploring to the southwest. Seeing this, Todd very straightforwardly pulled a map from his hand. The map of the abandoned land was one of the additional terms when the deal was reached with the Moon Elves. Even though the proud Moon Elves have always imprisoned themselves in the Moon Shadow Forest, they have lived on this land for thousands of years after all. As early as when the ancestors were still alive, the Moon Elves lived here. So, even though the black fog was spreading, the Moon Elves were able to provide some useful information about the general situation of the abandoned land before the black fog spread. And with the fire of the eternal fire provided by the Moon Elves, the scouts of Antolia were able to explore the black fog without the protection of the shadow manipulator. According to the Moon Elves, the southwest of Wilson Fort was a grassland many years ago, and we did find the footprints of cattle and the traces of plants being eaten in the southwest of Wilson Fort, so the southwest has always been the focus of Antolia's exploration. Todd answered truthfully, but those cattle seem to be a little weird. Huh? Hearing this, Leon raised his head and looked at Todd, who was hesitant to speak. During the period of exploration in the southwest, the scouts of Antolia once saw cattle with their own eyes. When? Why didn't you report it? Hearing this, Leon couldn't help but frown. You know, due to the special situation of the abandoned land, among all the cities under the rule of the Ximena family, the news from Wilsonburg has always had the highest priority. And it is T0 level priority. Because the accuracy of the news has not been verified. And the Marcus had already led his troops north at that time, so I sent several waves of people out to inquire about the news, and it was not until today that I brought back relatively reliable news. Todd said in a deep voice, according to what the scouts brought back, those cattle have sharp horns that are more than 1 meter long, and their bodies are covered with a layer of cattle hair that is about several meters long. Both their body shape and appearance are completely different from common bison. Affected by the black fog. Probably like this. Todd nodded very seriously, but the most important thing is that those bison seem to have become the mounts of some creatures? At this point, Todd's face showed a strange emotion. Other creatures? What are they? Hearing this, Leon suddenly became energetic. Leon always felt that the Moon Elves could never be the only race living in the abandoned land. Not all races are as proud as the Moon Elves. If it were someone else, they would have already entered Antolia along the Baragori Pass, not to mention stepping out of the Moon Shadow Forest. What he cares most about is naturally the attitude of these races towards the Antolians. Not all races are threatened by the black fog, and not all races are at risk of the world tree withering. Therefore, as outsiders, the Antolians can rely on the world tree to deal with the Moon Elves, but they may not be able to live in harmony with other races. Who knows if some races will become a group of crazy people under the influence of the black fog. It seems, a group of wild boars. Leon. Even though Leon had already prepared himself mentally, at the moment when Todd's voice fell, he still felt an indescribable emotion spreading in his mind. What the fuck? Leon was a little confused for a while. To be precise, they look like wild boars. At this moment, Todd tried hard to search for all the descriptive words he could think of in his mind. Their heads are pig heads. But they don't walk on 4 legs, maybe 2 legs, but not necessarily. Because they ride on those bison, but maybe not riding, anyway. Marcus, why don't I let those scouts come and describe it in person? Todd finally gave up on relaying. Go now. Leon said without hesitation. There's nothing for today. It's the end of the month, set a flag, and update well in October. Chapter 234 Leon understands risk sharing. In the mouth of the Antolian scout, Leon constructed the image of the wild boars in his mind for the first time. Rather than wild boars, they are pigmen that have undergone some specific changes under the influence of the black fog. They walk on 2 legs, fat but hunchbacked. They don't seem to have high IQs, but they wear simple grass skirts, and there seems to be a certain degree of level division. Because according to the description of the scout, the leading pigman seems to be wearing a golden belt in addition to the grass skirt. And not only is there a level division, the scene of wild boars riding bulls can at least prove that these pigmen have mastered the way to tame some specific creatures. What is this? The wild boar has become the second brother? After listening to the description of the scout, even Leon, who is well informed and has a very strong psychological endurance, couldn't help but fall into contemplation. Even if there are pigmen, will there be dogmen? Werewolves? Even minotaurs? It is obviously unlikely to establish diplomatic relations with pigmen. Because the Antolian scouts fled back in a panic. According to the scouts, the pigs seem to have a relatively controllable hostility towards all non-pig-headed creatures that walk upright, such as humans. The reason why it is controllable is that the pigs will not go crazy as soon as they meet the tall-legged birds. As long as they keep a certain safe distance from the pigs, they will not chase them relentlessly. Can you determine the range of the pigs' activities? Leon pointed to the map beside him and asked the returning scout. It should be in this area. The scout pointed to the southwest of Fort Wilson. Their range of activities should not be too large, otherwise they should have discovered the Antolians living in Fort Wilson now. And their movement speed is generally not fast. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why they choose the bison here as mounts. Why don't we gather the army to test it first? Hearing this, Todd made his own suggestion. Although Todd is a conservative in Antilia. But being conservative or not is always based on the situation and is relative. As long as it is not radical enough, it is conservative. And in military terms, Todd is absolutely a complete Antolian supremacist. No matter you are a wild boar or a pigman, let's pull them out and fight them first. Shut up. Leon glanced at him unhappily. Do you know how many troops are stationed in Fort Wilson now? It's not impossible to fight. But the problem is that Leon has not figured out the military strength between the enemy and us. If the number of those pigmen is beyond imagination, and they have even formed a certain social system or ruling structure of their own, then rashly starting a fight will definitely cause trouble. The garrison of Fort Wilson belongs to the Baragori Garrison Corps, with a total of about 1,000 garrisons. Todd answered truthfully. Can we fight? Can you determine in advance how many soldiers the pigmen will send over once the war starts? Not sure. Hearing this, Todd's voice couldn't help but lowered a lot. Send a message to Andrew, asking him to transfer the Laprit Corps to the Baragori Pass for garrison. Leon said in a deep voice. Although Leon has always been a young noble who loves peace and development and has all the good qualities, he must prepare for the worst in advance for everything. This is called being prepared for any eventuality. Understood. Todd replied quickly. I heard that Alicia is now in Fort Wilson. Yes. Then I will meet Her Majesty the Queen first. After all, the threat of the pigmen is not something that only the Antolians can bear. Leon said confidently. He knows how to share risks. It must be said that as the elven queen of the moon elves, Alicia was somewhat unfocused during this period. Everything in the abandoned land undoubtedly brought a very strong shock to the Antolians. But at the same time, the appearance of humans also brought an unspeakable shock to the hearts of the moon elves. After thousands of years of seclusion, the moon elves' cognitive level still remains at the level before the black fog spread thousands of years ago. Therefore, the moon elves have always been full of curiosity about everything about humans, or everything about the Antolians, and the shadow manipulators that they suddenly took out to dispel the Black Room. Even though the elves have always been extremely proud. Even once they regarded them, who were blessed by the World Tree, as the only tribe favored by the gods, but the arrival of humans mercilessly broke this perception. Even though they were unwilling to admit it, they were actually a little panicked in their hearts. Such emotions were particularly evident among the elders of the Moon Elves. Even Clemente, who now led the elven longbowmen to serve the Ximena family, would secretly compare the gap between elves and humans in his heart from time to time. And obviously, the result of this comparison is often not very good. And this result often produces another completely opposite action and attitude. Some elves will observe humans for this reason, hoping to cross the river with the help of the Antorians, so that the elves can regain their pride. As for the other part, they began to find various shortcomings and problems in humans, hoping to use this to prove that the elves are the only tribe favored by the gods, so as to satisfy their fragile self-esteem. As the queen of the elves, Alicia obviously belongs to the former. After all, her age is there. So much so that her thick skin and inner emotions could not let her deceive herself. That is why she often stayed in Wilsonburg during these days. And she even thought of a suitable reason for her behavior observing human activities and the situation of the World Tree. In fact, if you ignore Alicia's identity and the uncertain relationship between elves and humans, this is indeed a reason that cannot be faulted. But she is the queen of the elves after all. What is the matter with staying in the human city all day? Therefore, whenever she came to Wilsonburg to observe humans, Alicia would dress up as an ordinary elf. The elders of the elves and the human rulers of Wilsonburg also turned a blind eye to this, pretending not to know about this situation, but silently dispatched a large number of security forces to avoid inter-ethnic disputes. But pretending is just pretending after all. Since the Antolians are facing the threat of pigmen at this moment, Leon will naturally not go through those boring procedures. If you wrote to Johnny first, then confirmed the time and place of the meeting with the elves, and then had a preliminary understanding of the demands of both parties. After going through this whole process, the pigman might have become the marshal of the sky canopy. So, after confirming Alicia's current position with Todd, Leon sat in front of Alicia without hesitation. And Chapter 235 Leon never thought he was evil. Alicia likes the food in Wilsonburg very much. Although the elves own an entire moon shadow forest and live in an endless sea of forests, under the influence of the black fog, most of the berries taste weird. So most ordinary elves can only roast the fresh wild fruits they picked on the eternal fire. How to say it? The taste is very strange. Even though Alicia, the queen of the elves, will never eat as simple as ordinary elves. But the problem is, those berries growing on the edge of the world tree, even if they will not lose control of their emotions after eating, they certainly don't taste very good. But it's different here in Wilsonburg. Not to mention that when the people of the territory cultivate, they must first dispel the black fog. Nowadays, the territory of the Ximena family can be said to span the abandoned land, Antolia and the south bank of the Meyerson River. Wilsonburg is surrounded by farmland, and all foods such as berries come from the north of the mountains. And in that land that is far more vast than the moon shadow forest, there are naturally more kinds of edible berries and other plants. The taste is naturally much better. Even though the elves don't eat meat, Alicia loves the soft and fluffy white bread. Of course, Alicia couldn't just do it for food. She always kept in mind her mission as the queen of the elves. So during these days, she has been observing everything that happened on this land with her own eyes. And everything here naturally shocked her. From nothing to something. With the world tree that the elves once planted as the center, Fort Wilson can be said to have risen from the ground on this plain. Countless settlers from Antolia passed through the Baragori Pass and opened a new page in their lives on this land. Streets and houses. The walls of Fort Wilson were being built in an orderly manner, and the farmland outside the city was constantly extending. The Antolians were even trying to tame the skeletons wandering in the abandoned land. Although she was unwilling to admit it in her heart, Alicia had already realized that these humans in front of her had far more diligence and creativity than the elves. Especially a few days ago. She saw with her own eyes that young Marcus of Antolia appeared in the city again. Behind him, there were countless prisoners of war. Alicia had of course received the news from Clemente. According to the Moon Elf Elder, the Antolians had achieved significant results in the human civil war, and the tens of thousands of prisoners of war from Walrus were the best proof of the strength of the Antolians. Tens of thousands of prisoners of war were thrown into the construction of Fort Wilson without any waves. I am afraid that in a few years, this city will become the most solid fortress of the Antolians in the abandoned land. The return of humans to the abandoned land has become an irreversible trend. Just as Alicia was thinking about her next human observation plan, Leon sat opposite her carelessly. Alicia raised her head. Then she decided to frown to show her majesty as the queen of the elves. Because that's what the elders of the moon elves taught her. Keeping a cold attitude and a calm face is a compulsory course for all the queens of the elves. Leon. Your Majesty, do you know about Pigman? Facing the threat from his second brother, Leon got straight to the point. Alicia shook her head blankly. Antolia's scouts found traces of pigmen in the southwest of Fort Wilson. They ride tall bison under their crotches and seem to be quite hostile to all other races. Leon took the initiative to explain. Pigmen. Although the moon elves are also the natives of the abandoned land, to be honest, this is the first time she has heard of this name. Yes. Leon said with great confidence, Fort Wilson is built on the west side of the moon shadow forest. I think it is necessary for elves and humans to join hands and jointly resist all potential threats. In the previous Norton battle, Leon had already clearly realized the role that the elven longbowman could play. The elves' close combat strength may be average, but the elves' long-range deterrence ability is absolutely second to none in this era. After all, Antolia had just finished a war. It would be good if we could get one more helper. After all, for now, the Antolians and the elves are mostly on the same front. So, sharing risks naturally became Leon's first choice. Does the Marcus want to cooperate with the elves? Alicia looked directly into Leon's eyes. Yes. Leon nodded seriously, and, aren't we already cooperating? The reason why he stated his demands so directly was because Leon was fully confident that he could drag the elves into the water if Alicia refused. The moon elves need shadow manipulators from humans, And Leon also wants the Moon Elves' elven longbowmen. You know, Clemente is now leading hundreds of elven longbowmen to pledge allegiance to the Ximena family. When a round of arrows is fired, even if the elves still only want to guard their own little piece of land, they will inevitably attract some hatred from the pigs. The reason why he came to meet Alicia first was entirely because he was a progressive nobleman in the new era. But after hearing what Leon said about cooperation, Alicia's face couldn't help but darken. Does the cooperation that Lord Marcus said mean only doing half of the business? Hearing this, Leon's face naturally revealed an innocent look. The shadow manipulator can only dispel the black fog. But it can't make the world tree come alive again. Can't it? Leon's eyes couldn't help but flash a trace of astonishment, and he asked back with a little hesitation. Even with the help of the shadow manipulator, the world tree of the Moon Elves only stopped withering, but did not grow fresh branches and leaves like the world tree in Fort Wilson. Seeing Leon's innocent face, Alicia couldn't help but become a little hesitant. Don't the Antolians know? That's probably because of the land compactor. After pretending to ponder for a long time, Leon finally gave an ambiguous answer. Your Majesty, the elves want to make another deal. Alicia. If the strength of the Antolians is just average, then Alicia will naturally not give Leon a good face, and will definitely ask for a direct reissue of the land compactor. But the problem is that the strength of the Antolians is enough to make the Moon Elves feel terrified. Looking at Leon's innocent face, Alicia felt that this nobleman's heart was black. Today is gone. Chapter 236 Full Moon, Riot and Elves. Leon decided to reach a comprehensive strategic partnership with the Moon Elves. This is not only because of the threat posed by the pigmen, but also because the existence of the elves has now been completely exposed to the vision of the human countries. The relationship between the Antolians and the elves must be finalized as soon as possible to avoid being picked by the latecomers. To this end, the Antolians need to pay the price of a land compactor. In fact, in Leon's original conception, Leon originally intended to use the land compactor as a card in his hand and play it at the most critical moment, so as to force the elves to surrender to the Antolians. However, Leon thought the elves were too simple after all. The news from Jorny, the special ambassador of Antolia to the Moon Shadow Forest, also made Leon more and more aware that, at least so far, the pride in the hearts of the elves would never allow them to make such a choice. Thousands of years ago, the elves were attached to the ancestors. And thousands of years later, when the figure of human beings once again appeared on the land of the abandoned land, the elves would be attached again? Impossible. This is absolutely impossible. Alicia didn't dare to agree, and the elders of the elves would never agree. However, the temptation of the land compactor was too strong after all. So 3 days later, after a long period of intensive consultations, the elves and León Ximena, the Marquess of Antolia, signed a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement in Wilsonburg City, with Antolia as the main force and the Moon Elves as the auxiliary force. The so-called Antolia as the main force means that the Ximena family will become the only human neighbor who can directly communicate with the Moon Elves. If the Moon Elves are interested in human goods, they should also purchase them from the Antolians first. At the same time, the Moon Elves and humans, or to be more precise, the Moon Elves and the Antolians, must work together to resist all external forces that threaten the major security concerns of both parties. For example, the pigmen. In return, the Antolians will also use the land compactor to bring the world tree growing in the Moon Shadow Forest back to life. Both sides are naturally happy about the conclusion of this agreement, which will surely become a model of cooperation for the Antolians to achieve mutual benefit and win-win in the new era. Moreover, due to the long-term seclusion of the tribe, the Moon Elves are not averse to the Antolians becoming the only friendly human neighbors. Because Leon has proved the military strength of Antolians in the previous war with the Principality of Norton. And if the geographical location is taken into consideration, the Antolians control the Baragori Pass connecting the abandoned lands and the northern continent. Even if the Moon Elves want to communicate with other human forces, they can only obtain the right of passage to Antolians first. So this agreement is actually just a more formal framework for the cooperation between the Moon Elves and the Ximena family. The purpose is just one sentence: work together for mutual benefit and win-win. Instead of letting the other human nobles mess around, it is better to let the Antolians come. Since the agreement has been signed, I think some information still needs to be communicated. After picking up the pen and signing her name, Alicia finally spoke. For example, under the influence of the black fog, The abandoned land is far more dangerous than anywhere else, and you must be especially careful during the full moon. What do you mean? Leon frowned. He didn't think there was anything wrong with the fact that the elves had not told him this key information before. He was a human. As a race that returned to the abandoned land after 1,000 years, humans could be considered complete outsiders in the eyes of the elves. It would be a foolish thing to be honest with each other as soon as they met. This was the same reason as when he knew that the world tree could not be revived by the shadow manipulator alone, but he still didn't elaborate. Both sides were thinking of blackmailing each other. It just happened that a group of pigmen came. This forced the elves and the Antolians to be honest with each other. The full moon in the abandoned land is different from that in your northern continent. Under the cover of the black fog, only at the end of summer every year will the moonlight penetrate the black fog covering this land and bring the full moon to the abandoned land. But, although the moon elves are favored by the god of moonlight, many phenomena and species in the abandoned land have long been affected by the black fog. So, the full moon often means that there will be a riot throughout the abandoned land. What is the specific situation? Leon asked without hesitation. You know, as early as when he led the Antolian army to open the eyes of the walrus people, it had already entered summer. Wait until the war is over, the benefits are distributed, and finally wait until he comes to the abandoned land. You know, it's only about a week away from the end of summer. Damn elves. Every full moon, all the elves will gather around the world tree in the moon shadow forest and be on full alert. Although the moon elves have never heard of the pigmen mentioned by the Marcus, they have heard dense and noisy roars and horse hooves on the outskirts of the moon shadow forest. Now that I think about it carefully, the sound of horse hooves stomping on the ground should not be so dull. Maybe it is the pigmen and cattle mentioned by the Marcus before. Alicia answered with a guilty conscience. After all, she is not an old monster of the elves who has lived for more than 100 years. She is far from being able to look calm even though she knows a little bit. Are you sure? Even though Leon was a little unhappy, it was obviously not the time to argue with the elves. Anyway, the comprehensive strategic partnership agreement has been signed. At least this year's full moon, unless the elves choose to break the contract right after signing, they will have to come to Wilsonburg to help out. Hearing this, Alicia couldn't help but shake her head. The trees in the moon shadow forest are tall and dense, so it's naturally difficult for those guys to enter, so they have never met the moon elves. But Fort Wilson. At this point, Alicia's eyes couldn't help but sweep to the surrounding construction sites. The walls of Fort Wilson are far from being completed. If the full moon this year really faces an invasion by certain species. In fact, the residents of this city can take refuge in the moon shadow forest. Alicia gritted her teeth and took the initiative to release the goodwill of the moon elves. Even if the moon elves may have wanted to cheat humans before, now that the agreement has been signed, the elves can't just provide all support except help, right? At least, the pride in the hearts of the moon elves prevents them from doing this. And if you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 237 Leon intends to let the pigs experience the treatment of the walrus people. It's okay to be unhappy. Even the interactions between nobles are full of intrigues. It's impossible for humans and elves, two different races, to be honest with each other as soon as they meet. Leon has always been very clear about this. Antolians are never afraid of war. Facing Alicia's words, Leon said truthfully. Although he also understood that compared to Fort Wilson, preserving the living force is of great significance to the Ximena family. But many times, many things cannot be generalized. Because this is likely to be the first battle fought by the Antolian army in the abandoned land. If they run to the moon shadow forest without even fighting, or retreat to the Buragori Pass, then what will happen next? Prestige. Sometimes it is very empty. For example, in the Andal Kingdom, Leon likes to keep a low profile. Unless the situation forces him to do so, he will definitely stay there. But sometimes it is very important. For example, the land that Leon is stepping on at this moment is the abandoned land. In this land where there may be countless races, humans are just one of them. The threat of the pigmen may be just the first threshold. If you need to shrink back even to cross this threshold, then what about the future? You know, in order to further develop the abandoned land, León plans to issue the abandoned land development bonds in the future. Therefore, whether the results of the hard work of the Antolians can be preserved is an important factor in whether this plan can be successfully implemented. After all, if you can't even withstand the riots during the full moon, how can others believe that their investment will not go down the drain? This is obviously a very realistic point that must be considered when making a decision. However, León still left a loophole in his words, just saying that the Antolians are not afraid of war. As for whether to fight or not, and how to fight, it is still necessary to wait for more accurate information before making a decision. In this case, after a long pause, Alicia finally said, "The Moon Elves can send another 150 elven longbowmen to help the Antolian army." The news of the full moon was provided by the Moon Elves very late. Now that the agreement has been signed, it is necessary to show enough sincerity. This is also the pride of the elves. They are indeed conceited, but it is precisely because of this that they will not easily break their promises. This is a good start. León smiled. Only after seeing Alicia off did León's face gradually become serious and solemn. There is still about a week before the full moon. Seeing this, Todd on the side couldn't help but remind him. Send a few groups of scouts to find out the situation of the pigmen. Be sure to get accurate information within a week. In addition to the Laprit Corps that I ordered you to dispatch earlier, order the Southwest Highlands Garrison Corps to assemble in the direction of Fort Wilson, and send a letter to one to let him lead the Antolian militia to station at the Baragori Pass. León issued a series of orders in a decisive manner. The Antolians are never afraid of war. No matter what the outcome is, it is always good to prepare for a rainy day. As long as the pigmen really dare to threaten the rule of the Ximena family on the night of the full moon, then the Antolians will dare to pick up weapons and fight them without hesitation. The only question is whether to choose Fort Wilson or the Baragori Pass as the location for the battle. I understand. Since there was only a week left before the full moon, León simply settled down in Fort Wilson. It would be fine if he hadn't heard the news about the pigmen, but the news about the pigmen and the full moon night came when he was inspecting work in Fort Wilson. If he left at this time, what would the others think? As the Marquess of Antolia, it is León's unshirkable responsibility to defend the territory of the Ximena family. As the lord of this land, León must not send out a signal that makes people hesitate. What's more, it's not just the Antolia army that is gathering towards Fort Wilson, but also a large number of equipment that craftsmen have built for the Antolia army in these days. And many of them were originally built to resist the cavalry from the Kingdom of Walrus. However, due to the subsequent development of the Norton War, León had to choose to travel light and lead his army to advance, so he didn't use it. And now, considering the possibility of the existence of the century-famous painting Wild Boar riding a bull, León naturally wants to bring all these things here. This is a treatment that even the walrus people have not enjoyed. It is also a blessing for the pigs. Of course, in addition to the transportation of necessary food and supplies and the assembly of the army, the prisoners of war who have just arrived at Fort Wilson, and the Antolian settlers who have already arrived at Fort Wilson, are also not idle. They have either been on the battlefield or experienced the hounds attacking the city in the year of the jackdaw. Facing the possible war, they may be nervous, but they will not shrink back. It is for this reason that as the news of the full moon crisis began to be consciously released by León, the people living in the city can be said to have burst out with amazing action. And León's request for them is also very simple, that is, to do their best to build a city wall. It is indeed impossible to build the city wall of Fort Wilson within a week. But if you start working at full speed, it may not be impossible to build one or even two walls with all your strength. Perhaps in the eyes of some people, there is no difference between having only one or two city walls and having no city walls at all. But what León knows is that as long as there is a city wall, even if there is only one city wall, then when facing the pigmen riding cows, they can avoid the dilemma of being attacked from all sides. After all, the pigmen are not two legs. There are also bison living on this land under their crotch. And this means that as long as their IQ is enough, they can bring great threats to the Antolian army through faster action speed. So, the city wall must be there. Even if there is only one side. If the soldiers of Antolian can rely on the solid city wall, then the defense pressure will be suddenly reduced. What's more, according to Todd's analysis, the pigmen probably have no means of long-range attack. Otherwise, the scouts sent out by Antolian before are likely to not come back. And this means that León can completely let the long-range attack arms including the elven longbowmen climb the city wall, thereby causing continuous output damage to the enemy. Antolians will never lose. León has always had great confidence in the future of the Ximena family and the abandoned land. No more today. Thanks to the Buck Friends poll and 20210831012208199 inches for their military funding support. Chapter 238 León questions the pigman's IQ. Hussein was silently watching everything in front of him. As one of the prisoners of war in Walrus, this was his first time to participate in and witness the war mobilization of the Antolians. In just 1 week, the western wall, which had just been completed by less than half, rose from the ground in the sweat of countless workers. Although there was only one side, Hussein still felt a strong shock. Perhaps the prisoners of war were just working under the whip of the Antolian soldiers, but what about the people living in the city? When the news of the coming war spread in the city, the Antolians did not feel the slightest panic. After all, they had experienced too much chaos. Until now, the Huns' attacks on the city in the year of the Jackdaw were still vivid. So much so that when the Antolian army, led by León, attacked the city and stationed troops at the Baragori Pass, the future Antolian, no longer encountering the raids of the Plateau Hounds. To be honest, the Antolians are a little bit unaccustomed to it. And now, during the full moon, they may face sneak attacks from some unknown races. When this news spread among the people, the familiar feeling came back. This is right. Of course, although the Antolians are not afraid of war, they are not fools. Women and children have retreated to the south of the Baragori Pass under the protection of the Antolian soldiers. At this time, those who remain in the city are either strong Antolian men or prisoners of war from the kingdom of Walrus. It is precisely because of this that Antolia was left to build the city wall wholeheartedly. In order to ensure the chances of winning this battle, León even set his sights on prisoners of war like Hussein. The first is the calculation of work points. During the preparation period, the work points accumulated by the prisoners of war were calculated at double the standard. In addition, after fully considering the importance of this battle and the change in the mentality of the prisoners of war, León even rejected all objections and issued a slightly controversial order. That is, among the prisoners of war in the kingdom of Walrus, select slaves who are willing to get rid of their captive status as soon as possible to form the first Walrus Auxiliary Army. The Auxiliary Army is the servant army. If we want to give an accurate positioning, it is probably the cannon fodder troops that obey the orders of the Ximena family. Of course, cannon fodder is different from cannon fodder. At least the cannon fodder of the Ximena family is much safer than the private army of the other noble lords in many cases. As long as you can achieve certain military merits in the war, you can get rid of your identity as a slave as quickly as possible. And facing this policy, Hussein naturally responded with pleasure. The Walrus people can indeed work. But for former Walrus nobles like Hussein, if you want to achieve your goals and get rid of the identity of slaves imposed on them, there is no faster way than fighting. Even if there is only a rusty scimitar in his hand, Hussein dares to fight. Not only him, León's call has been responded to by countless Walrus prisoners of war. Because after these days, they have almost figured it out. Instead of wearing the label of Walrasians all their lives, it is better to integrate with Antolia. What's more, the strong are respected has always been the creed in the minds of Walrus people. If you can't beat them, join them. Since they were captured by the Antolians, becoming Antolians naturally became the dream of many people. And now, the threat of the pigmen gave them this precious opportunity. Therefore, no one was willing to give up this idea. As soon as León issued the order to form an auxiliary army, a large number of people crowded at the entrance of the temporary recruitment office. It was not dissatisfaction, but a serious oversubscription. So, the Walrus people who won the most in this battle will share the quota of 500 auxiliary troops. This is the promise made by León, and it is also what Hussein yearns for the most. Of course, as a lord, León naturally has no time to take care of the thoughts of the prisoners. After intense mobilization and marching, as the full moon approaches, the main corps headed by the Laprit Corps and the Antolian militia have also arrived at the designated location one after another. And León finally got a relatively accurate intelligence about the pigmen. In addition to standing on 2 feet and wild boars riding bulls, which have long been known, after a rough observation of the movement trajectory and number of the pigmen, León can roughly determine that the number of pigmen, at least the pigmen entrenched around Fort Wilson, is about 2,000. It seems not many, but we have to treat them with caution. After all, these more than 2,000 pigmen can be said to be pigs riding cows. If a formal battle is launched, the impact of the charge must not be underestimated. Night falls, and everything is silent. Countless stars dot the deep sky, and as time goes by, a round blue-white full moon finally penetrates the clouds and black fog on the horizon, and silently lights up this vast land. The surrounding grass and trees appear particularly graceful under the moonlight, but the haziness in the distance seems to contain a sense of oppression. This is the first full moon that the Antilleans have experienced since they came to the abandoned land. On the blue star, the full moon is endowed with poetry and romance. But here, the round moon with a little paleness in the green makes everyone feel unspeakable weirdness and uneasiness. Leon stood on the newly repaired western wall, silently looking into the distance. Every time the full moon comes, this land shrouded in black fog will riot. This is a fact that has been confirmed by the moon elves. The only question is, will this riot affect Fort Wilson and the rule of the Ximena family? But in any case, Leon is ready at this time. This city not only gathers the two garrison corps of the Baragori Pass and the Southwest Highlands, but also the Laprik warriors and Antolian militia who arrived urgently. This is a luxurious lineup that Leon has never seen when he went north to Norton. In addition, countless chevaux de frise, traps, and caltrips are already all around, and the Antolian soldiers have also been ready for battle. Marcus, look over there. In the silent night, Todd suddenly reminded. Hearing this, Leon, who is already tense in his heart, hurriedly looked in the direction of Todd's finger. However, the skeletons that were originally dull seemed to be affected by some inexplicable influence at this moment, and their behavior began to become weird. In Leon's eyes, a skeleton suddenly pulled off its arm and smashed it on the skull of the skeleton next to it. Bang! With a crisp sound, the head of the skeleton that was attacked fell to the ground and rolled several times along the ridge of the field. The skeleton that pulled off its arm, and its originally intact forearm also fell to the ground under the influence of the reaction force. And this seemed to finally kick off the prelude of the full moon night. The skeletons on the side stared blankly at the skull head rolling on the ground, and in an instant, the originally friendly skeletons suddenly wrestled together. So much so that after a moment, the ground was full of scattered bones and skeletons crawling on the ground looking for their body parts. Then they couldn't fight anymore. After all, the body parts were scattered on the ground, and the skeletons were busy picking their own bones in the pile of bones. Those skeletons. None of them are ours. Todd quickly added, all the skeletons that have been stuffed with the fire of the eternal fire by the Antolians are still very normal now. Full moon. Looking at the scene not far away, Leon's eyes couldn't help but become a little more solemn. The black fog can be dispelled, but what about the moonlight? If the full moon comes every year, doesn't it mean that every late summer, the Antillean soldiers will gather in the abandoned land one by one? The development of the abandoned land will not be delayed because of these few days, but if it is a war, build a wall. Every settlement and every city built by the Antolians in the abandoned land must build a wall. This is the only way Leon can think of so far. At this time, the ground not far away seemed to begin to tremble. Sure enough, they're here. Leon raised his head and stared at the team that appeared on the horizon not far away. This was the first time he saw pigmen in person. They had fat bodies and bent backs. It seemed that they had not yet fully adapted to standing and walking, and the way they rode on the bulls was somewhat funny. Leon couldn't figure out how their short and clumsy legs allowed these guys to ride on the bison, but what he knew was, as long as those pigmen dared to attack Antolia, then Leon would definitely leave them with an indelible impression. After all, as Leon's eyes swept over, he had roughly seen the number of pigs in the team. About 2,000, which was not much different from what the Antolia scouts had found out. If the difference between infantry and cavalry was not taken into account, then Leon could say that the advantage was mine. However, Leon would definitely not open champagne at halftime. He just gestured to Todd on the side, indicating that the Antolia soldiers were ready to fight at any time. At the same time, even if they were in a state of madness, the pigs were still somewhat confused. Hum. Looking at the city that appeared not far away, the leading pig fanned his ears, with a little confusion in his crazy eyes. They seemed to be communicating with each other, wondering when a city would appear on the plain in front of them. However, the communication in pig language did not last too long. Especially when the pigs discovered the humans standing at the foot of the city wall, ready to fight. Hum. A pig suddenly roared loudly in the direction of Fort Wilson. What are they saying? Leon's face showed a trace of confusion, and he looked at the moon elf elder Clemente beside him. I don't know. Clemente was also a little at a loss. To be honest, although the moon elves have been in this land for a long time, under the policy of the closed-door tribe, they don't know more about the pigs than the newly arrived Antilleans. Especially for the ugly race like the pigmen. The elves were even unwilling to even look at them. If the pigmen don't attack, then the Antorian soldiers will stay where they are. Leon said in a deep voice. Leon yearns for peace after all. Before the Antorians have the strength to look down on all races, how nice it would be for everyone to work together in harmony? Why fight when there is nothing to do? However, Leon's idea obviously cannot be fulfilled. Seeing that there is no response from humans, the pigmen began their charge with a high-pitched hum. Shoot! The elf longbowmen, who had been waiting on the city wall, had already bent their bows and arrows. With Todd's order, countless arrows burst out like raindrops. However, what surprised Leon was that the bison seemed to be covered with a layer of extremely hard fur. Even the arrows shot by the elf longbowmen could hardly penetrate their thick fur. Aim at the pigmen. Don't shoot the cows. Todd shouted loudly. Bison are not afraid of arrows, but pigmen are. Although the bison will continue to charge without the pigmen, but... No, isn't their IQ a little insufficient? Just when Leon was a little distressed because the long-range offensive he prepared was not satisfactory, the actions of the pigmen surprised Leon greatly. So, looking at the pigmen cavalry rushing towards the Antillean army, Leon finally asked the doubts in his heart. You know, the Antilleans set up countless chevaux de frise around Fort Wilson. But the main purpose of Leon setting up these chevaux de frise is actually just to slow down the impact speed of the cavalry. Going back and forth, the impact speed will naturally be reduced. However, those pigmen seem to be unable to see those chevaux de frise, and they're rushed straight up. What can I say about that scene? It was a pig and a cow flipping over. It is absolutely impossible not to feel distressed. The pigmen riding on the bison may not die, but the bison with several holes poked in it is likely to not live long. Even though the arrows could hardly penetrate the fur of the bison, the huge impact force, which hit the horses straight, could not withstand the damage to the fur, no matter how hard it was. And if they won this battle, these bison would be the precious wealth of the Antilleans. Seeing his wealth that he had not yet obtained being tossed around like this, Leon was naturally very upset. Line up. Prepare to meet the enemy. With Leon's roar, the Antillean phalanx that the soldiers had practiced for a long time finally appeared on the battlefield for the first time. Today is gone. Chapter 239, Antilia Phalanx. In this era, the victory or defeat of a war is usually linked to morale. As for formations and phalanxes, they are not so important in the eyes of the nobles. After all, you can't expect the conscripts who are still farming in the fields a few days ago to come up with a set of neat and high-spirited phalanxes in a short time. As a time traveler, Leon has already heard of countless military formations in his past life experience. From the Swiss phalanx that once dominated the battlefield to the Spanish phalanx in the Golden Age. These names recorded in history books have left an indelible impression in Leon's mind. Even though Anatolia now has neither musketeers nor artillery, this does not prevent Leon, as a lord, from adapting to local conditions and taking advantage of the situation. Together with the veterans of Anatolia, he has developed a set of battle phalanxes that can be applied to various situations. And the Anatolia phalanx, which Leon has high hopes for, was born for this reason. Since there are no muskets, the mechanical quivers made by craftsmen are used as a substitute. Spearmen, sword and shield soldiers, longbowmen, all kinds of melee and long-range attacks are available. In addition, in order to resist the extremely ferocious pigmen cavalry from a distance, Leon even specially built a batch of shield carts, which can also be called shield-armored carts. This thing was originally prepared specifically for the cavalry of the walrus people. However, since these shield carts are made of extremely heavy and hard oak, in order to prevent the impact of cavalry, the front is even specially covered with a layer of iron armor. Even if they can be pushed by the wheels underneath, the speed is quite worrying. So when Leon led his troops north, he had to strategically abandon this anti-cavalry equipment with certain limitations. What? You want to ask why it is built when the movement speed is so slow? Naturally, it is because the noble private army of this era moves slower. Whether it has practical value depends entirely on how it is used. The original intention of building these armors was purely to consider that the Anatolian army would not be dragged down by friendly forces when following the Andal Kingdom army in large-scale operations. Anyway, there is plenty of iron in the Southwest Highlands, and the craftsman's proficiency can be improved by making this kind of armor. And now, in Fort Wilson, these shield vehicles suddenly came in handy. Each shield vehicle is connected to each other by a few meters of iron cables, with its back against the west wall, forming an arc-shaped square formation. This is not actually the Anatolian square formation in the strict sense. However, the situation of the war changes rapidly, and the enemies faced are also different. The Anatolians will naturally not tie their hands and feet because of the so-called square formation. If you look down from mid-air, the Anatolian formation actually looks a bit like the Quiu formation. Yes, it is the famous military formation in the history of a mysterious ancient country that once defeated the cavalry. The biggest difference is that behind Anatolia is not a river, but a city wall. The support is not the navy, but the Anatolian cavalry ready to go not far away. After the battle in the north to Norton, everyone in the Anatolian militia now has a horse. Although Leon was reluctant to let the precious cavalry fight those sturdy bison head-on, they were more than enough to support them. At the same time, as the pigmen's rowers gradually approached, the dust on the ground was shaking constantly, and the first wave of pigmen cavalry finally collided head-on with the armored car. Boom! Under the impact of the bison, even the indestructible armored car supported by logs could not help but tremble slightly. Fortunately, the Anatolians' armored gear never cut corners, which was able to withstand such a fierce collision. And the iron chains connecting the armored cars also overturned one bison after another in a chaotic and tense sound. Kill! Seeing the bison tripped and the pigmen overturned, the Anatolian soldiers who were hiding behind the armored vehicles immediately used their swords to send the most cordial physical greetings to the pigmen who dared to charge the army. It was really reckless and stupid. In the pig language dictionary of the pigmen, there was probably only one word: charge and kill. Even though the pigmen in the front had been blocked by the armored vehicles, the pigmen cavalry behind them still charged forward one after another. And this was obviously the biggest risk that any cavalry had to face. The pigmen cavalry coming from the back could not stop the car at all, or they had no intention of stopping at all. The sharp horns on the bison's head might not break the defense line connected by the armored vehicles, but it was enough to open a big eye on the pigmen in front. For a while, blood splattered. It was unclear whether it was chopped by the Anatolians or hit by the pigmen cavalry in the back row. Anyway, the entire battlefield, and even the entire west side of Fort Wilson, began to be filled with a pungent smell of blood. And facing these pig knights who rushed over like wolves and tigers from not far away, the Anatolians naturally would not hold back. Pigmen and humans are two completely different races. On a battlefield where the language is completely unspeakable, there is only life and death, and no surrender. Especially now that it is a full moon. The pigs' simple minds have been affected to a certain extent, so that they don't know what retreat and surrender are. However, the impact that the armored vehicles could withstand is limited after all. In other words, the impact of the bison completely exceeded everyone's expectations. So much so that at the edge of the army, there were several armored vehicles that could not withstand the charge of the pig cavalry, and the connection of the fixed iron chain was suddenly thrown away with a hoarse cracking sound, so that the Anatolian soldiers standing around were thrown into a bloody mess due to the flying iron chain. Cavalry! Cavalry! Standing on the west wall of Fort Wilson, Todd raised the flag of the cavalry charge without hesitation. Perhaps in a head-on confrontation, the impact of the Anatolian cavalry is far less than that of these pigs who seem to have been injected with chicken blood. But what if the impact of the Anatolian cavalry comes from the side, or even the rear? Kill! The Anatolian army formation facing the enemy head-on attracted all the attention of the pigs. And their underdeveloped brains and completely undeveloped cerebellums are not enough to make them aware of the threat of the cavalry wandering around. Seeing the inevitable loss of personnel in the Anatolian army formation facing the enemy head-on, the Anatolian cavalry formed a charge formation on the edge of the battlefield and could no longer hold back the blood in their hearts. Under the leadership of Juan, a group of Anatolian cavalry did not hesitate to stab the pigs' butts from the rear. Under the cover of night, the Anatolians are using their blood and courage to put an end to this war. I'll check for typos and update the next chapter within 10 minutes. Chapter 240, the Marquis's prestige increases monotonously. Hussein tightly grasped the weapon in his hand and pulled it out of the chest of a pigman, leaving only a hole with blood flowing. Although he had been on the battlefield countless times, there is no doubt that this was his first time on such a battlefield. Wars are different from wars. Hussein immediately realized this when he first saw those hunched, fat and big-eared pigmen. Facing the impact of the pigmen and bison, no soldier was afraid, and no soldier retreated. Even in the kingdom of Walrus, such morale is extremely rare. Blood splattered and the sound of killing shook the sky. The tribal conflicts within the kingdom of Walrus have never been peaceful, but Hussein can say without hesitation that this is the most difficult battle he has ever fought. And this war also made him finally realize why the army of Anatolia can thrive in the territory of the Principality of Norton and turn the occupied areas of the kingdom of Walrus upside down. Because fundamentally speaking, the matching mechanism of the two sides is different. The kingdom of Walrus was facing the kingdom of Andal, the kingdom of Idrit, and the human forces in the northern continent that had conflicts with the kingdom of Walrus. These forces were not as good as the kingdom of Walrus, so most of the time, the Walrus people fought with the advantage. On the other hand, the Antolians, the enemies they faced were not humans at all. Whether it was the plateau hounds he had heard about from others, or the pigman cavalry he was facing at this time, these were completely aliens and monsters. The smell of blood aroused Hussein's cruelty, especially when he saw those soldiers who fell to the ground under the impact of the pigman cavalry. At this time, not only him, but also the Walrus prisoners of war who fought together, were no longer thinking about the different identities and traditions between the Walrus people and the Antolians, but about humans and aliens. Kill! Hussein roared loudly. Even though he was not wearing very strong armor at this time, he only thought of one thing in his heart, that is, to kill all the enemies in front of him. Whose soldier is that? Standing on the wall of Fort Wilson, Leon certainly noticed the soldier who jumped up from the crowd and threw a pigman to the ground. Even among the Antolians, it is extremely rare to have such courage and force. It should be a prisoner of war from Walrus. The attendant beside him replied quickly. This is actually very easy to distinguish. The Antolian army, whether it is the main army or the garrison soldiers, wears a full set of protective gear. The only difference is the quality of the protective gear. As for the prisoners of war from the kingdom of Walrus, they are holding only abandoned or rusty iron swords and knives in their hands, and their identities can be distinguished at a glance. If he can still survive after this battle, write down his name. Leon said without hesitation. If this person is willing to be loyal to the Ximena family wholeheartedly, then Leon doesn't mind giving him a chance. After all, slave soldiers are slave soldiers after all. Unless they are mentally ill, they will not have any attachment to the kingdom of Walrus. Yes. While Leon was watching the battle, the emissary from the Moon Elves was also observing everything in front of him. The assistance of 500 elven longbowmen naturally gave the emissary from the Moon Elves the opportunity to watch the war beside Leon. Leon wanted to use this battle to show the momentum of the Antorians in the abandoned land. And how could the elves not want to see the strength of the Antorians through this war? As for the conclusion, even though the battle under the city wall was extremely intense, it was a fantasy to be able to block the attack of the pig cavalry with infantry. The elves asked themselves, they certainly couldn't do this. Even though there were factors such as the city wall and a number of weapons and equipment, being able to produce equipment that could resist cavalry was itself part of the strength of the Antorians. What's more, as the Antorians on horseback stabbed the pigs' butts fiercely, the outcome of this war was actually very clear. A big win. This is undoubtedly a great victory. When the deafening shouts and screams gradually subsided, the periphery of Fort Wilson had already been stained red with blood. The Antolians certainly paid a price, but the results were equally amazing. If, before this, the Moon Elves might have had other ideas in their hearts, then after this battle, the cooperation pattern with the Antolians as the main force and the Elves as the auxiliary force was already doomed. What's more, during the course of this war, Leon, as a mage, could keenly perceive the prying and movement from the black fog. However, it is obvious that there is a precedent of pigmen. Even though it is a full moon at this time, all the races in the abandoned land are ready to move, but no enemy dares to easily try to provoke the majesty of the Antolians. The only thing they can do is to quietly bypass this city controlled by humans, and then go crazy somewhere else. And this is the meaning of fighting this war. Use sufficient military strength to force other ethnic groups living on this land to accept the fact that humans have returned to the abandoned land. All wounded soldiers were treated on the spot, bandaged and disinfected urgently, just like what was done after the previous war. Leon said without hesitation. Compared to counting the gains of this battle, the first thing León did was to comfort the wounded. The army is the arm of the Ximena family. Personally comforting the wounded is a good opportunity to consolidate the rule of the Ximena family and increase the loyalty of the soldiers. A few simple words of comfort from the noble lords may be enough to make the soldiers grateful. From the hounds attacking the city to the mountain people's night attack, and then to participating in the kingdom war twice in a row, the Antolians have long been familiar with the emergency treatment process promoted by León in this land. Precious liquor was applied to the soldiers' wounds as if it was free, and the military doctors who were already familiar with it also skillfully bandaged the soldiers with clean gauze. Although a standard treatment process has not yet been formed, it is actually just a matter of time. After all, under León's repeated requests, even the most ordinary soldiers have realized that such a complete set of treatment procedures can greatly reduce the probability of soldiers dying from injuries. The direct consequence of this is that the Antolians are fighting more and more desperately. Marcus, let's go see the bison. Only after León greeted the injured soldiers with concern, Todd came over from the side. Even though the pigs had been hacked to death by the Antolian soldiers. But many bison were left. Because the soldiers also knew that whether it was used as a mount or as an ox, the ox was always a good thing. There was no more today. Chapter 241, Niu brings new possibilities to heavy cavalry. Even though most of the wild cattle in this world belong to the class of mammals and the order of artiodactyls, the family of bovines. But the breeds of cattle are always different. Some cattle are stubborn and strong, while others are soft and timid. Even humans are the same. Some were born in Rome, while others have been cattle and horses for generations. Obviously, the wild cattle living in the abandoned land belong to the former, and can be roughly classified as the kind with a strong physique. This is not hearsay, but the understanding gained by the Antolian army in actual combat. However, since the Antolians' previous attention was basically focused on the pigmen, it was not until this moment, when the war ended, that León was able to truly calm down and carefully observe this new species living in the abandoned land. According to the conclusion drawn from León's own 1.0 vision, the size of these wild cattle is a whole circle larger than that of ordinary oxen. But this circle of enlargement is not fat, but strong. Even though their bodies were covered with a layer of rough, dark brown hair like that of yaks, León could still see the unparalleled explosive power hidden in them from their limbs that were as thick and hard as stone pillars. But this was not actually the most conspicuous feature of these bison. The horns on their heads were not only exceptionally thick, but also nearly 1 meter long. In the previous war, the bison driven by the pigs tore through the defense line built by the Antolian soldiers with armored vehicles with their powerful explosive power and the hard horns on their heads. Wilson bison. León has always been a bad namer. Since these bison were captured on the battlefield of Fort Wilson, it seems reasonable to call them Wilson bison at first glance, and it is also quite reasonable when you think about it carefully. Well named, Marcus. Todd on the side quickly acted as a supporting role, and the waiters around him applauded one after another. Only the bison tied by the Antolian soldiers with iron chains uttered a dissatisfied hum. But it doesn't matter. Cows. Either they can be used as laborers or as mounts. If they can't do either of the above, then they can only be dishes on the Antolian table. And since even the pig people can build a cavalry with these Wilson bison, then the Antolians can naturally do the same. León has enough confidence in this. If the Antolian militia can achieve the new achievement of everyone having a cow after everyone has a horse, then let alone the Andal kingdom, even in the Walrus kingdom in the north, León will definitely dare to walk sideways. After all, a cavalry whose mounts are completely made of bison is not an ordinary cavalry. This will definitely be a heavy cavalry. Even though the long history of Blue Star has proved that heavy cavalry has always had debuffs in many aspects such as flexibility and durability. But the problem is, the Wilson bison in front of him seems to have reduced the impact of these problems to the greatest extent. Not to mention that their strong bodies can easily carry a fully armed knight. The fur on their bodies that can block arrows is enough to make the bison not need to wear full armor. Just use iron armor to protect the vital parts, and the bull cavalry of Anatolia will definitely make a bold and colorful contribution to the history of heavy cavalry in this era. Oh. No. There is no heavy cavalry in this era. So, if the Antolians can really make a heavy cavalry, it will definitely be a history. How many heads have been captured? León stretched out his hand, brushed the rough and slightly dry cow hair, and asked. Now there are about 400 heads that can jump around. Todd quickly gave an answer. The rest of the bison are either dead or have some injuries on their bodies. It is not certain how many can survive. Enough. Hearing this, León nodded with satisfaction. On the previous battlefield, because the shield-armored vehicles of the Antolians blocked the pigmen's charge, a large number of bison and pigmen were blocked together, so that the pigmen cavalry in the rear could only rush forward, and this also caused the bison's sharp horns to cause indiscriminate damage. So when the war was over, there were more than 400 of them still alive and kicking, and the vitality of these Wilson bison could be called tenacious. Mr. Marcus, what should we do next? Seeing that Leon's originally furrowed brows gradually relaxed, Todd asked hurriedly. In his opinion, this time the pigmen happened to be defeated, and the Antolian army should naturally pursue the victory. It's not just for merit. In other words, what's more important is the pasture controlled by the pigmen. Although these Wilson bison in front of them have shown some changes due to the existence of black fog, their essence is still cattle after all. As long as they are cattle, they need to eat grass. Monkey tail grass is the favorite of Wilson bison. The scattered ones around Fort Wilson alone cannot support such a large herd of cattle. The pig's territory is hidden in the black fog. If we want to take advantage of the victory, we must first negotiate with the elves and get enough fire. León naturally understood what Todd meant. As his eyes swept across the messy battlefield in front of him, León finally gave his answer. The shadow manipulator is bulky after all. Although it is not impossible to march with a shadow manipulator, the problem is that if the shadow manipulator breaks down halfway, or the enemy's attack destroys the shadow manipulator, then the Antolian army will be lost in the black fog. Therefore, if you really want to go deep into the black fog, the eternal fire of the moon elves is undoubtedly an indispensable thing. And the race hidden in the black fog is definitely not just the pigs. Although the Antolians are determined to get the pasture covered with monkey tail grass, how to fight and whether to fight still need to be carefully considered. Anyway, thousands of pigmen have been defeated at the gates of Fort Wilson, so pursuing the victory naturally does not depend on these few days. If the strength of the pigmen is limited, then it doesn't matter if it's a few days late. But if the pigmen are numerous and can recover from this defeat in just a few days, then León can only give up for the time being, and even reconsider the number of Antorians stationed in the abandoned land. After all, Antorians are now participating in a cross-server match between races. Conflicts with nobles, who can still regret and admit defeat, are two completely different things with completely different dangers. And Chapter 242 No one wants to be the Marquis's running dog more than me. Fort Wilson, the governor's residence. As a senior general of Antolia, Todd, who is deeply trusted by León, now has several positions, and the governor of Fort Wilson is one of them. However, the so-called governor's residence, except for the sign hanging on the roadside, is actually neither a governor nor an official residence. It is not even a wooden house. In the final analysis, it is just a larger marching tent. There is no way. In today's Fort Wilson, the construction of city walls and city defense facilities is the top priority. As for large-scale projects like the governor's residence, they are reserved for later use to increase jobs. Anyway, the Antolians are not so delicate. At least so far, the current generation of Antolians do not care much about these things. As it is approaching the end of summer, there is already a little coolness in the evening breeze. The candles around the tent swayed in the wind, and the soft sunset glow covered the land with a layer of orange before completely disappearing on the horizon. Since León, as the Lord, came to Fort Wilson, the governor's mansion naturally became León's temporary residence. Although the appearance looks a bit simple, it is small but well equipped. The geographical location is second to none. It is located next to the World Tree, which is the best choice for warm winter and cool summer. When Fort Wilson is completely built, the housing prices and land prices around the governor's mansion will definitely be the best in the city. At this moment, León was curiously looking at the young man standing in front of him. No, in fact, he can't be considered a young man. The walrus prisoner in front of him has the strength of a young man and the appearance of a middle-aged and elderly person. According to Hussein, he should be in his early 30s this year. But, at least in León's opinion, the wrinkles on Hussein's face, the countless scars on his body, and the fluffy and macy light brown hair make this prisoner who claims to be only 30 years old look more than 40 years old. Judging from his appearance alone, it is not an exaggeration to say that he has been through a lot. Your name is Hussein? Goodal Hussein. After staring for a long time, León asked. Yes. Hussein knelt on the ground with his head down, his face almost touching the ground under his feet. Gudul Hussein. With the end of this battle, Leon also got the name of the particularly brave prisoner from the waiter. Under the charge of the Pigman war cavalry, it was this guy, holding the scimitar in his hand that was even slightly rusted, who had always rushed to the front of the prisoners and ended the lives of dozens of pigmen in a row. It was precisely because of this that this prisoner who looked ordinary and even a little old entered Leon's field of vision and was finally brought to Leon. You used to be a noble of the kingdom of Walrus? Second class Doran. There was no emotion in Leon's voice. Yes. Hearing this, Hussein's head lowered even more. It can't be said that he was close to the ground, but he wanted to embed his head into the soil. Although before this, Hussein had countless thoughts in his mind. But it was not until he finally met the most powerful nobleman in the south of the Andal kingdom that Hussein finally realized the tension and even fear in his heart. This fear did not come from Leon, but from Hussein himself. Although before this, Leon's series of promises made Hussein's heart rise again, but the attitude of most Andal nobles towards the Walrus people cannot be said to be friendly, but can basically be regarded as extremely hostile. Even though Leon's previous policy on treating prisoners of war was enough to be called kind, what if Leon's previous attitude was just a disguised appearance, in order to paralyze the Walrus prisoners of war? Especially since he was once a nobleman of the Walrus kingdom. Hussein was really worried. He was worried that Leon would order people to hack him to death because of his former identity and the force he showed. If that was the case, how could he avenge his revenge? Raise your head. Leon and Todd looked at each other, and then said in a deep voice. Leon naturally knew the surname Hussein. After all, whether it was Leon's father, Arthur Ximena, or the older generation of Ximena's family who had passed away, they had participated in the war with the kingdom of Walrus before. And the surname Hussein was one of the most noble surnames in the kingdom of Walrus a few decades ago. When the Hussein tribe was at its most glorious, the Hussein family once had a first-class tableau and two second-class tablets. As for the nobles with the title of Dulan, there were countless of them, and they were one of the most prominent families in the kingdom of Walrus. However, everyone has glorious moments, don't take a moment as permanent. Since the Walrus royal family, the Graham family, obtained the highest power in the kingdom of Walrus, in order to consolidate the rule of the Grand family, suppressing large tribes such as the Hussein tribe has always been the measure pursued by the Grand family. Therefore, the once glorious Hussein tribe naturally disappeared in the powerful class of the kingdom of Walrus under the continuous tribal conflicts. Both men and women were reduced to slaves. For the members of the Hussein family, this is obviously unfortunate. But for Leon, this seemed to be good news. In the silence of the tent, Leon slowly walked to Hussein and said, "Are you willing to pledge allegiance to the Ximena family?" Upon hearing this, Hussein's eyes flashed with surprise. After a brief moment of surprise, Hussein lowered his head and kissed the noble boots on Leon's feet without hesitation. This is the highest etiquette for the Walrus people to swear allegiance. Kissing the boots of the superior is to show one's loyalty and willingness to be driven by him. Yes, Gudul Hussein is willing to serve you and become your most loyal lackey, he said without hesitation, with a tremor in his voice. In that case, Leon drew the long sword from his waist and slowly pressed it on Hussein's shoulder. Then I, the common lord of the Antolians and the ancestors of Agairs, the Antolian Marcus Leon Ximena, hereby grant you freedom. Feeling the cold blade against his neck, Hussein felt a burning sensation in his heart. In order to get rid of his slave status, he worked hard in the kingdom of Walrus for many years. However, in the end, it was here, in the abandoned land controlled by the Ximena family, in such a short time, that he obtained the status he had always dreamed of. Chapter 243, The Marquis's Promise is Worth 1,000 Pieces. Leon needs to set a benchmark. And this is exactly why he decided to give Hussein a chance. As Todd said, Leon treated these Walrus prisoners a little too gently. He did not drive them with violence or threaten them with hunger. Instead, he gave the prisoners a faint hope. This is obviously a little unreal. Not only did Hussein doubt it, but the prisoners also had doubts about Leon's promise. For this reason, Leon intends to add fuel to the fire. Contradictions are different from contradictions. In Leon's view, vertical contradictions, such as gender and race, are largely to cover up the horizontal contradictions hidden under the surface. In places like the abandoned land, the more intuitive racial contradictions that are different from tribes and regions can often eliminate or dilute the gap between the Antolian settlers and the Walrus prisoners to the greatest extent. Therefore, the existence of pigmen and other races is actually both good and bad. The disadvantage is naturally the threat to the Ximena family and Fort Wilson. The benefit is that the existence of these threats can integrate the prisoners of war into the group of Antolians at the fastest speed. The merits Hussein made in the previous war were actually on the blurred boundary of being free or continuing to be regarded as slaves. In terms of military exploits, Hussein naturally met the requirements. But in terms of the time he served the Ximena family, he was obviously far behind. However, León still granted the status of Ximena family subjects to the prisoners of the Walrus Kingdom. Because he needs to prove his promise through practical actions, so that more Walrus people can realize his excellent character of keeping his promise. Is there hope, and how strong is the hope? This will have an unignorable impact on the subjective initiative of the prisoners of war. Especially in a place like the abandoned land. The earlier the defense of Fort Wilson is completed, the more confident the Antolians will be. And for every tens of thousands of subjects under the rule of the Ximena family, the Antolians can fast forward their exploration of the abandoned land. So, between permission and non-permission, León chose to grant him freedom. When León's voice fell, this walrus man who had experienced decades of slavery, this prisoner of war who had always been firm and calm, could not help but tremble all over. My Lord Marcus. At this moment, he prostrated himself on the ground and kissed León's boots hard. From now on, the Baragori Garrison Corps will set up a Walrus Auxiliary formation with a quota of 500 people, led by you, to increase the garrison strength of the Ximena family in the abandoned land. As I said before, whether it is serving the Ximena family in the army or serving the Ximena family on the construction side of Fort Wilson, as long as the prisoners of the Walrus Kingdom complete the previous requirements, then I will naturally abide by my previous promise. Let the most humble slave have the opportunity to become a dignified Antolian. León took back the sword against Hussein's shoulder and said in a deep voice, "As you wish, respected Marcus." Hussein slowly raised his head and answered very seriously. When Hussein slowly retreated under the leadership of the guards, Todd finally spoke, "Isn't it a bit too fast?" "No." León shook his head. "We haven't been able to fully understand the situation in the abandoned land until now. Only by making the prisoners of war in the Walrus Kingdom loyal to the Ximena family can we speed up the construction of Fort Wilson and strengthen the garrison force to the greatest extent. Pigmen will never be the only race that is hostile to humans, and the Moon Elves will never be the last race willing to cooperate with humans. Only when the power of humans continues to expand, those guys hidden in the black fog will emerge one by one, and the people of Anatolia will be able to distinguish who is the enemy and who is the friend. But if those prisoners of war get the weapons, don't we still have you? My governor of Fort Wilson, Lord Todd." León smiled. "The Baragori Pass must be guarded by the most loyal Antolian warriors. As long as the Baragori Pass is controlled by the Ximena family, no matter what happens, nothing in the abandoned land will affect Anatolia. And, the prisoners of war in the Kingdom of Walrus have also witnessed the threat of pigmen and those races that are very different from humans. Without the support of the Ximena family and the food from Anatolia, this land that has just begun to be built will not have the possibility of surviving in the wolves. So they dare not rebel or disloyalty to the Ximena family. The strong are respected." This sentence has always been engraved in the bones of the Walrus people. "I understand." Hearing this, Todd nodded seriously. If León's decision only surprised Todd, then Hussein's change of identity is enough to make any Walrus prisoner look sideways. It turned out that the young Marcus was not joking, let alone lying. When the prisoners saw with their own eyes that Hussein, who was originally a prisoner of war, was wearing this brand new set of armor and swaggering out of the Antolian military camp, the prisoners from the Kingdom of Walrus were boiling. Goodal Hussein. As one of the prisoners of war, they naturally knew this name. After all, the Hussein family was just one of the families that perished in the tribal conflicts within the Kingdom of Walrus in recent years. Even if there was no Hussein, there would be Yasin and Isin. And on the previous battlefield, the prisoners of war naturally saw with their own eyes the bravery and madness of this man. The only thing they didn't expect was that the Marquis of Anatolia really kept his previous promise and turned it into reality in such a short time. This is completely different from the delay of the Walrus nobles in fulfilling the promises. And it seems that the other promises made by the Marquis are probably the same. At this moment, the turbid eyes of the prisoners of war seem to have quietly become more spirited and more hopeful than ever before. "The Marquis has said so. He ordered me to gather 500 prisoners of war, form a walrus auxiliaries formation, and participate in the fight for the grasslands and pastures. As long as you have enough military merits, you can also obtain the status of free citizens more quickly. At this moment, amid Hussein's roar, ripples were stirred in the hearts of the prisoners of war. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 244. From then on, the Ximena family had their own ranch. The Antolians called the grassland on the west side of Fort Wilson the Nality Grassland. This was not a name given by Leon, but from the map provided by the Moon Elves. To be honest, the map provided by the Moon Elves is a few years old and probably an old map that has long expired. But the spread of black fog does not mean a change in the geographical environment or even the geographical location. Since it is still a pasture covered with various vegetation, Leon, who claims to be the co-lord of the Antolians and the ancestors of the heirs, is naturally happy to accept this name that has been passed down from thousands of years ago. In order to allow the Ximena family to control this vast grassland in their own hands, when the Antolian soldiers had rested, the 500 walrus prisoners of war were reorganized, and the fire of the eternal fire from the Moon Elves was delivered one after another. The Antolian army finally began their first active attack since they entered the abandoned land. This was an extremely smooth march. It was so smooth that Leon felt a little incredible. Because of the cover of the black fog, even if the soldiers of Antolia had torches, their visibility was extremely low. Narrow vision means danger. So the speed of the Antolians' march can be described as a tortoise's pace. Almost all the Antolian soldiers pushed the shield-armored vehicles slowly forward, with a highly vigilant mind, guarding against possible sneak attacks from all directions. However, when the Antolian army, which had been fully prepared for war, finally pushed their heavy shield-armored vehicles and stepped into the Nality grassland under the cover of the cavalry on both wings, there was no pigment to be seen here. As the shadow manipulator began to roar, this grassland, which had been shrouded in black fog for thousands of years, finally appeared in front of every Antolian soldier as the black fog dissipated. Perhaps, all the pigmen here were affected by the full moon and have all died outside the city of Wilsonburg. Todd put forward his own opinion. Although before this, Leon had made such speculations in his heart to some extent. But war is never a trivial matter, and Leon, as a lord, dare not gamble. That's probably it. Leon nodded, and then cast his eyes to the rows of houses not far away that were not neat. Obviously, that was once the residence of the pigmen. And this means that the pigmen in the abandoned land not only have simple thinking ability, but can even start to build their own homes? At this moment, a subtle solemnity flashed across Leon's face. The pigmen who invaded Wilsonburg on the night of the full moon had been killed by the Antolians, but the others? Leon didn't think that there would only be thousands of pigmen in the abandoned land. In this case, will the pigmen continue to come in an endless stream? This is a possibility that Leon had to consider. Marcus, it's all empty inside. The walrus auxiliary soldier who rushed to the front had already kicked open the wooden door of a pig house, exposing everything in the house to Leon. Well, it was a very narrow pointed wooden house. It's not so much a wooden house as it's a bit exaggerated. The actual size is about the size of a large wardrobe, which can barely fit a pigman. In front of each pig house, there is a fluorescent grass hanging with a hemp rope, which can emit a faint yellow light in the dark night and on the land filled with black fog. Is this really a house? Leon asked in confusion. But he couldn't help but believe it. Because the appearance of these buildings is actually no different from wooden houses, except that they are a little too small. One by one, the pig houses stand next to each other on the grassland covered with monkey tail grass, like a miniature village. Sure enough, with human thinking, it is still hard to understand what the pigs used to build such a large area of such short wooden houses. The fur covering their bodies makes it unnecessary for them to live in these houses. Have we won this battle? Todd turned his head in a daze. There was no way. What appeared before Antolia was a completely empty village. Apart from the footprints on the ground and the unique smell of pigmen emanating from the surroundings, there was really no sign of a pigman. Of course, this will be the territory of the Ximena family from now on. Leon nodded seriously. It was not that he did not want to eliminate the trouble once and for all, but mainly because under the spread of black fog, Except for the land illuminated by the eternal fire and the shadow manipulator, the Antolians could not go anywhere else. This grassland reaches the southern mountains of Anatolia in the north and the hinterland of the abandoned land in the south. The surrounding area is open and there is no strategic location to defend. Leon looked at the map sponsored by the elves and pondered, Wilson Ford is still the focus of construction. It is also the only place that Antolia's settlers and walrus prisoners of war want to build. As for this grassland, just build a small settlement here. Don't make it large, and don't relocate civilians. For the time being, it will be. I am willing to guard this land for the Marcus. Before Leon finished speaking, Hussein on the side took the initiative to volunteer. Hearing this, Leon couldn't help but turn his head and stare at the walrus man in front of him who was just a prisoner of war a few days ago. Hussein's purpose is very clear. A few days ago, he was still a prisoner of war, but suddenly became a free man. This is obviously not enough to gain the trust of the Marcus. And now, actively stationed in the potentially dangerous Natala grassland, for him, it can be said that there are both risks and opportunities. On the one hand, he can gain a good impression in front of Leon, and on the other hand, he can gradually gain the trust of the Ximena family as time goes by. Then I will give you this opportunity. Leon nodded in approval. Let Hussein lead a part of the prisoners to guard the Naladi grassland. This can be said to be the lowest cost option now. Not to mention that the food here is completely supplied by the Antolians, and there is no need to worry about the possibility of rebellion. The possible threat alone makes Hussein have to hold the thigh of the Ximena family tightly. And the most important thing is, he is a Walrasian. As a former nomadic tribe, both Hussein and other Walrasian prisoners of war are familiar with grazing and raising horses. Since the choice is to give Walrasian prisoners of war the opportunity to serve the Ximena family, then with enough checks and balances, Leon can naturally see the success. Even if the pigmen really come back, the dead are not the Antolians anyway. At least they are not yet. Chapter 245 Mendej Decision. Northern Continent, Kingdom of Idrit. As a country located on the westernmost side of the northern continent, the Kingdom of Idrit has always been called the corner of the continent, with half of its borders surrounded by the ocean. That is why the Kingdom of Idrit is much cooler in summer than other countries. The sea breeze blows over the reefs, refreshing with a little salty smell. The moist sea breeze passes through the plains in the west, across the hills in the middle, and all the way to the city of Loris located on the western foot of Mount Alagar. Loris city is the capital of the Kingdom of Idrit. Although far away from the ocean, the westerly wind from the ocean is blocked by the Alagar Mountains, forming rainfall on this land, nourishing countless land and farmland. This capital is undoubtedly one of the oldest cities in the northern continent. As early as the existence of the Holy Brun Empire, this was the fief of Duke Loris. As the Holy Brun Empire collapsed overnight, Duke Loris was crowned king with the support of many nobles, and the Francis family has since become the actual rulers of the Kingdom of Idrit. The full name is Duke Loris and King Idrit, blessed by God, the great sage, the protector of all humans, birds, beasts, insects and fish in the Kingdom of Idrit. Compared with the Andal Kingdom, which suffered a great chaos when the Holy Brun Empire collapsed, the Idrit Kingdom, which lived in a corner of the continent, did not suffer much from the turmoil of the collapse of the empire. Therefore, most of the buildings in Loris city still retain the characteristics of the Holy Brun Empire. On each spire tower, there is a cross that shines in the sun. On both sides of each street, there are still ancient and abandoned drainage facilities left over from hundreds of years ago. The old stained glass windows seem to be left with the dust of the years, and the ancient city maintains its original appearance in the melodious bells. The sun penetrates the clouds, and the sea breeze blows over the brick walls. Civilians hurriedly walk through the streets, and knights in armor gallop in the center of the street. At this time, a luxurious and extravagant carriage slowly drove out of the palace gate of Sandra Palace, the royal palace of the Kingdom of Idrit. The thin white gauze fluttered in the breeze, and the gilded strips on both sides of the carriage showed the noble and unattainable status of the carriage owner. Mendez leaned on the soft pillow in the carriage. He calmly felt the fresh and slightly humid air after a drizzle. Looking at the slowly approaching carriage, the originally noisy crowd suddenly fell into silence. But, at this moment, Mendez's heart was not calm. As the supreme commander of the Idrit army in this Norton War, Prince Mendez Francis did not share the biggest piece of cake among the Idrit nobles. Yes, he does have talents that others do not have. But not everyone thinks so. The inheritance law of the Kingdom of Idrit is not the succession in order, but the appointment system that has been passed down since the Holy Brun Empire. All direct descendants of the Francis royal family have the same right of inheritance. Only King Idrit can decide the final ownership of the throne of the Kingdom of Idrit. And it is obvious. The second Prince Mendej Francis is not the favorite heir in the heart of His Majesty, the King. The current King of Idrit only loves his youngest son. In the eyes of many Idrit nobles, the fourth Prince Altus is the most suitable heir in the mind of their king. And this has led to the trend of nobles choosing sides in the King of Idrit becoming more and more obvious. So much so that at the previous noble banquet, the benefits obtained by Mendej Francis and his supporters were suppressed, but Altus and his supporters got what should not belong to them. Your Majesty is old. Mendez closed his eyes and said slowly, without any emotional fluctuations in his tone. Not showing emotions on your face is a necessary cultivation for those in power. But your Highness is still young. A knight quietly boarded the carriage on one side and sat in front of Mendez. Hearing this, Mendez finally opened his eyes and stared at the knight in front of him. Are there any news? I have found a lot about the Marquis of Antolia. The knight said in a deep voice. Mendez is determined to win the throne of the Kingdom of Idrit. Even if the old king already has someone in his heart, Mendez will never watch the throne he has dreamed of being handed over to his younger brother, the fourth Prince Altus. So, accumulate strength and win over the nobles. This is what Mendez has been doing privately. Whenever a noble emerges, no matter what his background is, as long as he is useful, Mendez does not mind throwing an olive branch to him and promising enough benefits. Even a foreign noble from the Kingdom of Andal. In the previous Norton battle, the name of León Ximena lingered in Mendez's ears for the first time. Yes, that young man is not a noble of the Kingdom of Idrit. But who stipulated that to win over supporters, one must win over domestic nobles? After controlling the south bank of the Myrcid River, the territory of León Ximena, the Marquis of Antolia, bordered directly on the Kingdom of Idrit, which naturally made Mendez think about winning over that foreign noble. After all, Leon's great military exploits were in front of him. Since he was able to go all the way north from the south bank of the Myrcid River and capture the capital of Norton in an instant. So what if the target of the Antolia army's action was the city of Loris? I'm afraid it wouldn't take long, right? Although theoretically speaking, as the Marquis of Antolia, León Ximena had no reason to participate in the disputes in the Kingdom of Idrit. But it was reasonable to hire a mercenary from Antolia, right? So, since Mendez had the idea of winning over the young noble, it was also a very reasonable thing to first order someone to conduct a background check. If it is really feasible, then the gift that I promised to give to the Marquis must be carefully considered. Speak. Mendez stood up, and his originally calm face finally became a little serious. León Ximena, the patriarch of the Ximena family, the Marquis of Antolia. He once studied magic with the great wizard Albert in the city of Parma, and was just an ordinary wizard apprentice. But, since he became the new Lord of Antolia, this young noble has become completely different. And, Chapter 246 We must win over that Antolian noble. The wheels of the carriage rolled over the worn stone slabs on the ground. Amid the creaking sound of the wooden wheels, the knight's calm tone finally changed a little. After becoming a viscount, León Ximena led the Antolian army and civilians to survive the 5-year year of the Jackdaw, defeated the Plateau Hounds, and opened up the Southwest Highlands. Then he integrated the mountain people entrenched in Antolia, allowing the Ximena family to truly control the entire Antolian land for the first time. And all this took him only about a year. When hearing this, the face of the prince, who always showed calmness and indifference, already showed a little incredible expression. Only took a year? Exclamation mark. Although he already knew before that the Antolian Marquis was really young. But he was a noble of the Kingdom of Idrit after all, and a member of the royal family of the Kingdom of Idrit. Even though he knew that Leon was young, he was not very clear about the situation inside the Andal Kingdom and the true resume of the Marquis. Therefore, at this moment, the knight's words naturally made him feel a little unbelievable. Although these things were said very briefly, Mendez could fully expect that whether it was to resist the Plateau Hounds, to open up the Southwest Highlands, or to integrate the mountain tribes. Behind each of these things, there was undoubtedly a great danger hidden. For ordinary nobles, being able to solve one of them was enough to be proud of, but the Lord of Antolia completed 3 in a short period of 1 year. No wonder the Antolian army was able to appear on the south bank of the Myrcid River without making a sound. Because the Antolians controlled the Southwest Highlands. This allowed the Antolian army to take advantage of their position and go straight into the heart of Norton. Continue. After forcibly calming down, Mendez finally said. And the most shocking thing is that León Ximena, in less than 2 years, relied on his accurate judgment of the situation in the Andal Kingdom to capture the city of Parma during the Andal Civil War, gain the trust of the Andal King, and thus completed the leap from Viscount to Marquess. What else? All of this is already known. Mendez urged. Also, according to gossip, the Marquess of Antolia has actually integrated the noble forces in the south of the Andal Kingdom, including Greywater Castle, Ram City, and Parma City, and has actually become the most powerful noble in the south of the Andal Kingdom. What do you mean, integration? Mendez couldn't help but frown. You know, in addition to Parma City, Greywater Castle and Ram City were originally vassals of the Ximena family. Isn't it a matter of course for vassals to be loyal to their lords? Why were these 3 noble lords singled out? Don't the rest of the noble vassals pledge allegiance to the Ximena family? Hearing this, the knight took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, now, the Antolian army is responsible for all the defense and garrison tasks of these 3 noble territories. The young noble called it defense outsourcing. Now, the city defense of these noble territories is the responsibility of the Antolian army, and the mobilization of conscripts is also participated by the Antolian generals. This is not just loyalty, it can even be regarded as complete dependence. Mendez. What does this mean? This means that the military strength of the Antolians cannot be analyzed by numbers on paper. The situation of these 3 noble territories was found out by Prince Mendez's subordinates, but what about the others that they didn't find out? There are also those elven longbowmen, plus the war horses that the Marquess of Antolia brought back in the previous war. And the city that is most dependent is actually the city of Parma, which is now ruled by Viscount Cummings. Although it is not a vassal of the Ximena family, even the amount of tax revenue and the collection of taxes in the territory must be checked by the Ximena family. It must be said that the strength of the young, seemingly harmless Marquess has far exceeded Prince Mendez's previous expectations. If he is just good at fighting, then it is not difficult to win him over. But if he is good at fighting and even has extremely strong comprehensive strength, then the difficulty of winning over this foreign nobleman will undoubtedly soar. However, thinking of this, His Royal Highness couldn't help but become more excited. The higher the cost of winning over, the higher the return that can be obtained after successfully winning over. Because in most cases, costs and benefits are proportional. What's more, in addition to the examples listed by the knight before, the young Marquess of Antolia also controls many other things. For example, the south bank of the Meyerson River is now controlled by the Ximena family. That piece of land was once one of the most important granaries of the Principality of Norton. This means that the Antolians not only have a strong military force, but also have a lot of food in their hands in the future. And money. In the hands of the Antolians, or in the hands of the Ximena family, there's even the moonlight velvet that the nobles are now competing for. This means that if you can make friends with the Ximena family, then you will not only have the possibility of hiring Antolian mercenaries, but you can also strengthen your economic strength and get more money through trade with the Antolians. And more money will allow you to win over more nobles. Hiss. This will definitely be a positive cycle. So the only question now is what price you need to pay to get the friendship of the Marquess, so that the young noble will be willing to help you ascend the throne of the Kingdom of Idrit. Thinking of this, Mendez couldn't help but feel a headache. Although he knew that the Marquess had always wanted a larger population, now that the war was over, he couldn't just capture people from the Idrit Kingdom and send them over, right? Even in this era when the nobles had absolute power, such an approach was still a bit too outrageous. Do you still remember that egg? After pondering for a long time, Mendez looked at the knight beside him. You mean, the monster egg from overseas? The knight was stunned, and then confirmed. Let Count Felden send the egg to the Marquess of Antolia first. As for the other conditions, let Felden see what the Antolians need. As long as we can gain the friendship of the Antolians, then everything will be worth it. Prince Mendez said decisively. I plan to arrange a little cutie for Master Lai. What do you hope to hatch from the egg? There is no clear idea for the time being, so I'm asking for your suggestions. Chapter 247, Count Felden's Amazing Journey. Count Felden took on the responsibility of visiting the Marquess of Antolia for the 3rd time. As Prince Mendez's confidant and the Idrit noble who had the most contact with Leon, this task naturally belonged to him. Although the Earl was very nervous when he went to the south bank of the Meyerson River for the first time, and he was also a little nervous when he met Leon for the 2nd time. However, Leon's words that made people feel like spring breeze, and his considerate, handsome and friendly face, finally made the Earl of the Kingdom of Idric put down his vigilance. Master Leon is handsome and unrestrained, and the people of Antalya are all talented and speak well. He likes this job very much. So, the moment he received Mendez's instructions, Count Felden went lightly and ran all the way to the south bank of the Myrcid River under the protection of several knights. Of course, these knights protected not only Count Felden, but also the gift that Prince Mendez decided to give to the Marquis of Antalya. A monster egg from overseas. In fact, not only Count Felden, but even Prince Mendez himself, could not clearly explain the species and origin of the monster egg. Because the shell of the monster egg was as hard as a stone. Not only did it make a loud bang when knocked, but in the past 10 years, there has never been any sign of hatching. If it weren't for the Idric Kingdom's wizard, who was very sure that there was some kind of life inside the stone egg, no one would have thought that this was actually a monster egg that was pregnant with some kind of life. And the reason why Prince Mendez was able to get this monster egg was completely a coincidence. He didn't know how to hatch it, nor did he know what would hatch. But what he knew was that something like this, which was unique and whose value could not be measured, could be said to be the best gift. Monster eggs have always been extremely precious. In many legends of the northern continent, whether it was a dragon slayer or a respected hero, the protagonists of these legends were often followed by a powerful monster. Although no human has successfully hatched any monster eggs for more than 100 years, just for the tiny possibility of hatching a monster, people have asked Prince Mendez for it countless times. And now, in order to seek the friendship of the Antolians and gain the support of the Ximena family, Mendez did not hesitate to give this monster egg as his gift. The road was wet and sticky after the rain. The horse stepped on the puddles on the road, splashing a little mud from time to time. When Count Felden, as Prince Mendez's special envoy, finally passed the border checkpoint on the south bank of the Myrcid River, what appeared before him was a vast and golden farmland. The wheat on this land is almost ripe. The heavy ears of wheat are round and bent the stalks under them. In the city of Iderport, except for the monument standing in the center of the city and the ruins deliberately preserved around it, this coastal town can no longer see any trace of the coming of war. The Marquis said that these ruins were preserved to awaken the people living on this land. Although the remnants of the restoration retreated briefly under the attack of the Antolians, no one can guarantee that those damn remnants of the restoration will not attack again. Seeing the puzzled expression on Earl Felden's face, the current governor of Iderport, Bello, took the initiative to explain. The Marquis's foresight is admirable. Earl Felden sighed sincerely. I am under the order of His Royal Highness Prince Mendez Francis of Idrid to meet with the Marquis of Antalya. After a brief greeting, Earl Felden took the initiative to say, Meet the Marquis? Isn't this war over? It's something else. Earl Felden replied briefly, I hope that Lord Bello can send a few soldiers to lead us to Antalya. Of course. Bello nodded seriously. Although the purpose of this Idrid nobleman's visit is unclear, just looking at his respectful appearance, one can know that this visit must have a request. And since there's a request, the Antolians will naturally get enough benefits. Although the Antolians generally do not think much of other nobles, they are absolutely 100% welcome to nobles like Earl Felden, who comes to give benefits every time he visits. The road from Iderport to the southwest highlands is now under intensive construction. Although it has just rained, this kind of horse-hoof-friendly cement road paved with a grim slime, which is unique to Antalya and is neither soft nor hard, still remains just dry. Looking at the workers and farmers along the way, looking at this road that seems to have no end, Earl Felden's heart is filled with an indescribable emotion. I don't understand. He really doesn't understand. The harvest of grain and the paving of roads. Although other nobles would do these things, when they were done by the Antolians, they always gave people an unusual feeling. Earl Felden couldn't tell where this strange feeling came from. It wasn't until the night's casual chat that Earl Felden suddenly realized the reason for this strange feeling. The reason was that this land was still the territory of the Principality of Norton a few months ago. Even if it was counted from the day when the Antolian army just stepped out of Antolian, how long has it been? If it were another noble, I'm afraid the population in the territory would still be in chaos and panic after the war. But what about Antalya? Not only has the grain been planted early and has ushered in a bumper harvest, even the road connecting the southwest highlands and the port of Ider has begun to be built. It was under the influence of such emotions that Earl Felden moved forward all the way. Then, When he first set foot on the Southwest Highlands and the territory within the real Antolian range, the shock in Earl Felden's heart finally reached its peak. "What is that?" He stretched out a slightly trembling finger and pointed at the creatures several meters tall that were fighting with the Antolian soldiers not far away. Those creatures had long legs over 2 meters tall, ferocious big eyes and round black heads. Tall-legged strange birds. They are the rulers of the Southwest Highlands. In response to Earl Felden's question, the guide quickly gave an answer. "But, before the Antolians controlled this land," he added. And Chapter 248 Roar from the Southwest Highlands. The afterglow of summer spreads on this land southwest of Thorn Ridge. Amid the clamor of Antolian settlers, the once barren Southwest Highlands has long become a hot land full of vitality and all things compete. Against the backdrop of broken rocks and pink salt lakes, the mining town located in the Southwest Highlands further demonstrates the strong survival ability of the Antolians and the surging power of adapting to nature. At this moment, when Count Felden and his party finally arrived at the Southwest Highlands, Leon, the Marquess of Antolia, was also lingering on this land. However, Leon certainly didn't know about Count Felden's arrival. The Southwest Highlands was just the only way for him to return to Thorn Ridge via the Buragori Pass. The war that took place in the abandoned land came quickly and ended quickly. As the wave of pigmen offensives was blocked by the Antolian army, the pigmen community that originally lived around Fort Wilson was completely cleared out. Even the Nality grassland has become the territory of the Ximena family under the iron hoof of the Antolian army. In fact, it stands to reason that with the end of the war in the abandoned land, Leon, the Marquess of Antolia, should have returned to Thorn Ridge as quickly as possible to discuss the issuance plan of the abandoned land development bond with the butler Aaron. However, Leon was stopped by the news from the Southwest Highlands. A great piece of good news. That is, the steam engine of the Antolians was finally used for the first time in the mines of the Southwest Highlands. The nightmare fuel from the black fog not only burns much longer than coal, but also releases heat that ordinary coal cannot match. So, after experiencing the leapfrog development from the most primitive 1.0 version of the steam engine, the gas ball, to the 2.0 version of the steam engine, Leon has always had high hopes for this creation that appeared in the world for the first time. To put it bluntly, this was ordered by Leon himself. The first mechanical creation was created by the craftsman of Antolia under the guidance of his previous life memory without the help of his own golden finger, but with local materials. Whether it is for Leon himself, the Ximena family or the entire Antolia, it has an extremely important meaning. And now, after half a year of careful polishing, the craftsman of Antolia finally put Antolia's 2.0 version of the steam engine into practice. Although it is only the most basic application, it still makes Leon very excited. So, as the Lord, Leon immediately delayed his plan to return to Thorn Ridge and came to the mine in the Southwest Highlands in person. He wants to see everything that the Antolians have created on this land in the shortest possible time. Mr. Marcus Hughes Sandra, the new mayor of the mining town who had just been promoted by Leon, offered a respectful greeting to his young lord. He was the deputy of the butler Aaron and also served as a herald beside Leon. After the previous mayor of the mining town, Bello, successfully took office as the governor of Iderport and concurrently in charge of the south bank of the Myerson River, the young man named Sanders became the new mayor of the mining town. But at this time, Leon just waved his hand, staring blankly at the track not far away that made him feel very familiar. The stable roadbed, the rails on both sides, and the roadbed covered with the gravel. Looking at everything not far away, Leon couldn't help but have a dreamlike feeling. What did he see? In this alien world that was completely different from Blue Star, he saw the scene that he was once very familiar with. Although the application of steam engines by the Antolians is still very simple now, and many places even look a little inconsistent, it is undeniable that the Southwest Highlands, a land ruled by the Ximena family, has the first appearance of railroad tracks. Of course, although there are railroad tracks, they are not steam locomotives. As the steam engine roared, white smoke rushed out from the top of the steam engine, and the capstan on one side of the steam engine began to turn gradually. Then, the loose rope gradually tightened, and while the capstan turned and the rope was tightened, a minecar full of ore drove along the rails under the traction of the rope. Nowadays, the mining of the Antolians can be roughly divided into two modes. The former is aimed at being able to directly mine the sky-leaking mines with the help of the tall-legged bird. The workers of Antolia will pile the mine ore directly into the minecart, so that with the cooperation of steam engines, ropes and ground rails, a large number of open-air warm stones can be dragged from the rugged mine veins to the flat and open distribution center through the minecart. Compared with the use of horse-drawn carriages and ox-drawn carts for transportation, the efficiency is obviously much higher. The latter is the iron ore hidden in the mine. The miners will first place the mined iron ore in the basket, and then use a device similar to a cableway to use the steam engine placed outside the mine to provide power and drag it out of the mine. As for the subsequent steps, it is exactly the same as the transportation of warm stones. Although this whole set of processes is quite simple, and there is a lot of room for improvement in efficiency. But compared with full manpower, the mining speed of the Antolians can be said to have been improved by a level. Otherwise, when fighting against the pigmen on the night of the full moon, the Antolian soldiers would not be equipped with so many armored vehicles. Well done. Leon gave his own evaluation with great enthusiasm. As the new mayor of the mining town, Hughes Sandra certainly did not dare to take credit for himself, and hurriedly said, "This is all the credit of the dwarf craftsman and Antolian craftsman." As early as when Lord Bellow was the mayor, he had already designed the blueprint of this mining system. I just followed the previous plan and the established plan to implement it. Leon glanced at the young man with satisfaction. In this case, then you should manage the mining town well and strive to improve the efficiency of this mining system by a large margin. I believe you can do it, because Antolians have always been able to do things that others cannot do. Yes, it is indeed much easier to cheer up young people. Looking at the excitement on Sandra's face that could not be concealed, Leon thought sincerely. It must be said that many things are not enough to watch. Some people can stare at the video of repairing cow hooves for a whole day, and some people can watch the video of cleaning horsefly larvae and never get tired of it. For Leon, whenever he saw a fully loaded minecart being transported out of the mine with the sound of wheels colliding with the track, Leon's mood would become better and better. Just when Leon was immersed in the joy in front of him, the messenger from Antolia finally delivered the news. Mr. Marcus, Earl Felden of the Kingdom of Idrit has arrived. Chapter 249, The Antolians have a different understanding of passion. Led by the waiter, Count Felden soon came to Leon's side. Mr. Marcus. The Idrit nobleman who came from afar was about to salute when he saw Leon wave his hand and point to a place not far away. Seeing this, Count Felden could not help but be stunned for a moment. When he looked in the direction Leon pointed, he saw a square minecart, loaded with a full car of ore, slowly passing along the track laid on the ground. That is. Count Felden fell into hesitation. Obviously, the mechanical creation not far away has completely exceeded his cognitive scope. At a glance, it is just a minecart with 4 wheels. But if you observe it carefully, you will suddenly realize the unusualness of it. For example, Count Felden did not see animal power pulling. So, this must be a new thing made by the Antolians. Not bad, right? Leon looked at the Idrit nobleman, who could barely be called an old acquaintance, with a proud look on his face. The Antolian minecart is reasonably priced and fair to everyone. It can travel on the track without animal power, which can greatly improve the efficiency of mining and transportation. As the ruler of this land, Leon will never forget to promote Antolian products, and even more so to make profits for the Ximena family. It is ingenious and shocking. Earl Felden's tone was a little flat, and he just said it very cooperatively. Although the minecart running along the track not far away surprised him, Earl Felden's face was still very calm. It's not that it's not shocking enough, but that he has experienced too many shocks along the way. The reason is simple, just like taking too much medicine will produce drug resistance. From the south bank of the Myrcid River to the southwest highlands, the Earl's heart has already developed a lot of shock resistance. After all, he is the one who has touched the tall bird. Count Felden always felt that the brain circuits of the Antolian seemed somewhat abnormal. You can't say that they are not enthusiastic, but the understanding of enthusiasm by the Antolian seems to be slightly different from that of the vast majority of Idrit nobles. For example, on the way before, Count Felden and his party happened to see the Antolian soldiers encircling the tall-legged strange birds. As a noble, Count Felden's ideal was naturally to stay away. Those tall-legged strange birds are quite strange at first glance. Not to mention their ugly appearance, the strange body shape that makes people smack their lips is enough to make people feel timid. But, the Antolian guide who led the way obviously didn't think so. In the view of the guide, Since he had the honor of leading the nobles of the Kingdom of Idrid, he naturally had to let Count Felden experience the customs of Anatolia. And since he came to the Southwest Highlands, the tall-legged strange birds naturally became an unavoidable link. If you don't have a close contact with the tall-legged strange birds, how can you experience the enterprising spirit of the Antolians? How can you appreciate the hard work and diligence of the people of Anatolia? How can you appreciate the great achievements of the Marquis in opening up the Southwest Highlands? And it is not easy for Felden to refuse such an idea. As the envoy of Prince Mendez, since he has come to Anatolia, he represents the facade of Prince Mendez. If he is afraid to touch the tall bird, how can the Marquis of Anatolia have the confidence to cooperate with Prince Mendez? How can you believe that Prince Mendez has the confidence to fight for the throne? It is precisely for this reason that when Count Felden finally put his trembling right hand slowly on the dark fur of the dying wild tall bird, Count Felden's entire realm of thought has been elevated to an unprecedented level. So, at this moment, looking at the minecart in front of him, Count Felden's face was extremely calm. Although he was shocked, there was no danger to his life, which was not enough to make him show any other emotions on his face. And since he had touched the tall bird himself, Felden's behavior had become more standardized. Because according to the Antolians, the newly hatched tall bird has now become an indispensable labor force for the Antolians. Since even such a monster can be tamed, Antolia's status in Earl Felden's heart can't help but rise a few points. However, Leon naturally didn't know this. After all, he had just returned from the abandoned land, and he didn't know the previous welcome standards. He only felt that Earl Felden at this moment was completely different from when he met him in the Principality of Norton before, so that Leon even had some doubts. Could it be that someone in the Kingdom of Idrid, located in the west of the northern continent, has already made something similar to a steam engine? Ahem. Seeing this, Leon coughed lightly twice, and took the initiative to end the slightly silent atmosphere between the two. Why did Earl Felden suddenly come to Anatolia? Leon looked at the noble in front of him curiously. Since he had dealt with Count Felden several times before, Leon naturally knew who was behind this Idrid nobleman. However, he really couldn't think of anything that would make Count Felden come to visit him in person. The biggest possibility was trade. But for trade, there was no need for Count Felden, a nobleman, to come in person. I came here at the request of His Highness Mendez. Count Felden replied with great respect. After that, he waved his hand and signaled the attendant beside him to hold up the gift for Leon. This is a gift specially prepared for you by His Highness Mendez. Magic fluctuation. The moment the attendant lifted the curtain covering the oval stone egg, Leon immediately felt a magical fluctuation. He was not only a noble, but also a wizard, and a wizard who was well versed in ancient magic. Is this a monster egg? Although the shell of the monster egg felt cold and as hard as a stone, Leon made his own judgment immediately after feeling the magic fluctuations coming from the stone egg. Your Excellency the Marquis has a good eye. Upon hearing this, a trace of admiration flashed in Count Felden's eyes. This thing should be very expensive, right? His Highness Mendez is willing to give it to me like this? A foreign noble who I only met once. Leon stared at Count Felden's eyes, full of doubts. Although Leon knew the value of the monster egg very well, he knew even more that there would never be goodwill between nobles for no reason. If you want to get benefits, you must pay something. So, Leon decided to listen carefully to Count Felden, or to put it more bluntly, the request of His Highness Mendez, the Prince of Idrid. And Chapter 250 Leon took a big job. Count Felden's explanation gave Leon the most intuitive understanding of the succession struggle within the Kingdom of Idrid for the first time, and he also realized more deeply the great changes in his identity and status. After all, just 2 years ago, he was just an ordinary border noble in the Kingdom of Andal. Not to mention the Kingdom of Idrid, even the succession struggle within the Kingdom of Andal had no say, let alone his turn to stand on the side. And now, although Leon intends to reduce his presence, but the magic stroke of the Norton battlefield made the fighting power of the Antolian army resound throughout the kingdom and even throughout the entire northern continent without any surprise. So much so that at this moment, Prince Mendez of the Kingdom of Idrid threw an olive branch to him. But what made Leon feel a little fortunate was that although the nobles of this era had countless transactions in secret, the political wisdom of the nobles of this era was completely incomparable with a certain mysterious ancient country on Blue Star. For example, in the Kingdom of Idrid, the so-called succession struggle was actually not complicated, it was purely a matter of shaking people. although nominally it refers to the arbitrary system. But in reality, whoever can get more helpers after the death of the old king is more likely to ascend the throne. Mendez's request is also quite simple, that is, he hopes to get a mercenary from the Ximena family, and march straight in when he needs it, to help him stabilize the throne or seize the throne. The price to pay for stabilizing the throne and competing for the throne is completely different. After listening to Count Felden's story, Leon immediately grasped the key point. You know, the mercenaries of Anatolia haven't received such a big job for a long time. Although the army of Anatolia cannot participate directly, who says that the mercenaries of Anatolia cannot participate? What's more, whether it is beneficial or not is secondary. The main thing is that you can't watch the throne of the kingdom of Idrit slip away from your good brother the prince, named Wat. Especially after incorporating the land on the south bank of the Myrsin River into the territory of the Ximena family, the kingdom of Idrit has actually become a friendly neighbor of Anatolia. If we can establish a good relationship with the future king of the kingdom of Idrit, then it will undoubtedly be beneficial to both the Ximena family and the Antolians. Apart from other things, even if we only take out foreign trade, we can double the scope of target customers. When hearing Leon's words, a touch of joy suddenly appeared on Felden's face. I'm not afraid that Leon will offer a high price, I'm afraid that Leon won't offer a price. This was what Mendez personally told Count Felden before his visit. If he could really control the throne in his own hands, what kind of price would he, Mendez, not be able to afford? As long as it wasn't something like ceding territory that would cause the nobles to be indignant, Mendez had an extraordinary tolerance for Leon's offer. And the more powerful the Antolians are, the higher Prince Mendez's tolerance will be. Please tell me, Marcus, as long as it can be afforded, His Highness Mendez will do his best to meet your requirements. Count Felden promised solemnly. Hearing this, Leon didn't know where to start. Helping Prince Mendez was not just for the price that Prince Idrit could offer. Leon cared more about the long-term benefits that he could bring to Anatolia after he succeeded in taking the throne. However, long-term benefits are long-term benefits, and the deposit must be collected. If you want to make an offer now. He just gave him a monster egg. If you want to ask for a high price, Leon will be a little reluctant. Asking for food? Although at this moment, Antolia's food is a little tight. But there is no doubt that with the development of the abandoned land and the improvement of the soil on the south bank of the Myrsin River, Antolia's food will inevitably usher in another surge next year. Asking for population? Although Leon also wants population. But Leon knows better that you have to eat one bite at a time and take one step at a time. Anatolia had just obtained hundreds of thousands of prisoners of war and refugees from the previous Norton War. Not to mention that it was not realistic to let Prince Mendez traffic people to Anatolia. The Ximena family at this time really couldn't spare the time to accept more refugees. In this case, after pondering for a long time, Leon finally said, I heard that the shipbuilding technology of the Kingdom of Idrit is second to none in the northern continent. The Marquis wants to build a ship. Earl Felden couldn't help but show a trace of curiosity on his face. After all, in this era, the nobles really didn't pay much attention to the ocean. Even though the Kingdom of Idrit was far ahead in shipbuilding technology, its original purpose was just to catch more fish, which was inseparable from the geographical location of the Kingdom of Idrit on the west side of the northern continent. So Earl Felden didn't expect that the price offered by the Marquis was actually the shipbuilding technology of the Kingdom of Idrit. The remnants of the restoration of the country should come from overseas, right? Leon asked back. You mean? Hearing this, Felden couldn't help but show some hesitation on his face. The remnants of the restoration came from overseas. They not only caused a large number of civilian casualties in Iderport, but also created a lot of chaos on the land on the south bank of the Myrsin River. You know, the Antolians will take revenge. Leon said firmly. Of course. The reason why Leon wanted to build ships was entirely because his experience in the previous life made him understand the wealth hidden in the ocean. But some things can't be said clearly. There are abandoned lands full of foreign races in the south, and there are isolated islands overseas where the remnants of the restoration are entrenched in the west. Only the nobles around Anatolia believe that Leon has been involved in these two forces and diverted his attention, so they will relax their vigilance against Antolia's strong military power. If you need it, your conditions are completely acceptable to His Highness Mendez. Earl Felden gave the answer without hesitation. As for the others, is His Highness Mendez still well off? After getting Earl Felden's guarantee, Leon asked curiously. My Lord Marcus, do you need gold coins? The monster eggs and shipbuilding technology are the price for Anatolia to send troops. As for the gold coins and the amount of gold coins required, it depends on whether His Highness Mendez needs to consolidate the throne or fight for the throne with the help of Anatolia mercenaries. Leon said with a chuckle. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.